The muzzle flash bit the oppressive darkness. A brief, blinding bloom of orange that seared itself onto my retinas. The Mossberg bucked against my shoulder, a familiar, brutal recoil, and the sound of the shot was less a crack and more a visceral, percussive thump against the stillness of the midnight field. Something heavy dropped in the tall grass, a sound like a sack of wet bricks, followed by a choked gurgle that ended abruptly, leaving only the wind's low moan as a witness. My breath hitched. A jagged shard of fear lodged in my throat, but my hands were steady. They always were, even when the rest of me felt like a quivering mess of frayed nerves and cold dread. The old soldier in me still knew how to pull a trigger. One down, two more to go. Or was it three? Hell, I was losing count in the sudden, sickening clarity of violence. This was it, then. The moment all those whispered warnings in the dark corners of my mind had been building toward the end of the quiet, the beginning of whatever fresh hell the universe had decided to dump on my weary doorstep this time. Just another Tuesday, or rather, a Saturday night, and for a world-weary wanderer like me, one desolate, forgotten stretch of highway was much like any other. My current gig was a short-term, low-profile security detail for a modular home way out in the sticks. A place so remote even the crickets seemed bored. The owners, some corporate types, were out of state, so it was just me, the echoing silence, and a paycheck that barely covered gas and cheap coffee. A few nights of watching empty fields under a sky so vast it felt like a heavy blanket pressing down, and I'd be gone. That was the plan, anyway. Plans rarely survived contact with my reality. I'd rolled in late Tuesday afternoon, the kind of late that meant the sun was already bleeding orange and purple over the horizon, painting the endless flatlands in hues of tired resignation. The house itself was a sprawling, prefab monstrosity, all angles and vinyl siding, dropped onto a 5-acre parcel of nothing. It felt less like a home and more like a landlocked ship, listing slightly in a sea of overgrown prairie grass. I'd parked my beat-up truck out of sight, my go bag already on the passenger seat, a silent promise to myself that I was always ready to bolt. The air had a strange, metallic tang to it that night, like ozone, even without a storm brewing. I remembered pulling my worn leather jacket tighter around me, a useless gesture against a chill that wasn't from the air. My old analog wristwatch, a nervous tick more than a timepiece, felt heavier on my wrist than usual. Maybe it was just the isolation getting to me, playing tricks on a mind already worn thin by too many miles and too many bad memories. The first oddity came a few hours later. Dusk had long since fallen, swallowing the fields whole and leaving only the distant, indifferent glitter of stars. I was inside, doing my rounds, a lukewarm mug of coffee cradled in my hands. The house was cavernous, sterile without its occupants, and every creak of the floorboards under my weight, every groan of settling wood, seemed magnified. I just stepped past the entrance to the garage, heading deeper into the empty bedrooms, when I heard it, a sharp, resounding thud. The sound of the interior garage door, slamming shut, not just closing, but slamming, like someone had put their shoulder into it. My first thought, because my brain is wired for immediate cynicism, was that the wind had caught it, but there was no wind that night, not enough to violently swing a heavy door. I'd closed it myself, firmly, less than an hour ago. I called out, a reflex more than a real expectation. "Hello?" The word hung in the air, flat and meaningless, then vanished into the silence. No response. My hand instinctively went to the Walther PPQ holstered at my hip. Just nerves, I told myself. Too many late nights, too many bad stories. Still, I methodically swept the house, flashlight beam cutting through the gloom, its stark white eye dissecting every shadow. Kitchen, living room, all 5 bedrooms, even the oversized bathrooms. Nothing. Just dust motes dancing in the beam and the hollow echo of my own movements. The unsettling stillness lingered. though a thick, suffocating blanket that wrapped around the house. As if the very walls were holding their breath, it felt watched. I spent the rest of the night nursing a fresh cup of coffee and trying to convince myself it was nothing. My own paranoia, a familiar old friend, just coming to call. The feeling persisted into Friday. The air felt heavier, laden with an unnameable tension that tightened my chest. I kept checking the perimeter, walking the fence line, looking for signs of anything amiss. The field stretched out, innocent enough under the harsh glare of the midday sun, but I knew what they became when night fell. A void, a place where anything could hide. I even managed to flag down a neighbor, some grizzled old farmer named Stephen who occasionally drove his ancient pickup down the dirt road. We talked about the weather, the price of feed, the usual small-town banalities. Just as I was about to dismiss myself, he offhandedly mentioned something that made my blood run cold. He'd seen a black SUV, driving slowly along the road, headlights off, in the early hours of Thursday morning. "Real strange for around here, son," he drawled, spitting a wad of tobacco juice into the dirt. "Don't get much traffic, especially not the quiet kind." He just shrugged and drove off, leaving me standing there, a fresh knot of dread tightening in my gut. The garage door, the SUV. No coincidence. Nothing in my life ever was. Saturday night arrived like a predator, slow and deliberate, its shadow stretching across the land. I spent the entire day on edge, every little sound making me jump. The house felt less like a temporary sanctuary and more like a pressure cooker. I'd moved my duffel bags, the main one and the ever-ready go bag, right by the back door, just in case. Call it instinct, or just the accumulated wisdom of a man who'd seen too much. I checked my Walter, chambered around, checked the Mossberg. I hadn't seen the black SUV yet, but I knew it was coming. The certainty of it was a leaden weight in my stomach. Midnight came, bringing with it a profound silence, broken only by the frantic beat of my own heart. I was in the living room, perched on the edge of a surprisingly uncomfortable armchair, staring out the window that overlooked the long, empty drive. The moon was a sliver, thin and cold, offering little light. Then, from far down the road, a low rumble, a sound that vibrated through the very soles of my worn boots. It started faint, a distant hum, then grew, like a living thing drawing closer. My chest tightened, a familiar vice. Here we go. I pressed my face closer to the glass, breath fogging the pain. The black SUV was there, a shapeless mass against the darker backdrop of the night. It crept along, headlights still off, a silent hunter. It slowed, its engine's low growl vibrating through the still night, a monstrous purr. Then it stopped, not in the driveway, but about 200 yards down the road, just where the fields started to open up on either side. My pulse hammered in my ears, a frantic drumbeat against the silence. 3 figures emerged from the vehicle, their silhouettes barely distinguishable against the dim, moonlit field. They moved with a chilling precision, not walking but jogging, almost a sprint, across the open expanse with alarming speed. They were closing the distance too fast. My breath caught, and a wave of pure, unadulterated dread surged through me, cold and unrelenting, a familiar friend in these situations. One of them, the lead figure, cradled something long and dark. As he drew closer, a faint gleam of moonlight caught its barrel. A shotgun. My hand went to my wristwatch, thumb tracing the cold metal of the casing. A tick, a grounding mechanism. Useless. "This can't be happening," I whispered, the words trembling and thin in the empty room. Not again, but it was. It always was. I wasn't just a magnet for trouble. I was a damn beacon. I'd taken this gig to disappear, to just fade into the background. And here I was, about to get into a firefight with what looked like a damn militia in the middle of nowhere. My fault, really. Should have just bolted when I heard that garage door. That was the smart move. The Leo Vance move. But no, the stupid, stubborn part of me, the part I called my reluctant conscience, had to stick it out, had to see it through. What was I protecting anyway? Empty rooms? The corporate fat cats who didn't even know I existed? This was my fatal flaw, the rotten core of decency that kept dragging me into other people's nightmares. Or maybe my own. I moved, a low growl escaping my lips. My feet knew the way, guided by years of muscle memory. I snatched the Mossberg 9200 from where I'd left it leaning against the wall by the back door, its weight a brutal comfort in my hands. The cold steel felt good, familiar. I thumbed off the safety. No time for tactical genius, just pure primal defense. A sudden, sharp crack. The sound of breaking glass. It pierced the oppressive silence, sharp and jarring, echoing through the empty house. They'd shattered a window in the garage, not even bothering with the door. Bold, or stupid, probably both. I could hear their muffled footsteps now, heavy thuds against the concrete floor of the garage, then moving into the house. Low, guttural voices, muffled commands. They were inside. My breath hitched. They were searching, methodical and deliberate, their every movement steeped in sinister intent. I pressed myself against the wall next to the garage entrance. Just out of sight, my senses sharpened, the world narrowing to the faint creaks of the floorboards, the scrape of boots, the ominous approach of my unseen enemies. Fear gripped me, primal and all-consuming, a cold serpent coiling in my stomach, but beneath it lay a simmering, stubborn resolve. This was my job, for now, and I wasn't about to let some armed thugs just walk in. Not on my watch. The hallway light, a sickly yellow glow, flickered on near the bedrooms, casting long, warped shadows that seemed to dance with malice. They were getting closer. Their voices grew clearer, rough, impatient. I heard the distinct clack-clack of a shotgun being racked. My heart hammered against my ribs, a drum solo of pure adrenaline. My grip tightened on the Mossberg. My worn leather jacket felt suddenly heavier, a flimsy shield against the coming storm. The steps paused right outside the bedroom adjacent to where I was hiding. A brief, tense silence. Then, a low voice, almost a whisper, but it carried in the dead air. "Clear!" One of them moved. The door to the bedroom slowly creaked open. That was my cue. As the lead man stepped through the doorway, his silhouette momentarily framed by the dim light, I acted. There was no thought, only instinct, honed by years of running and surviving. The Mossberg leaped to my shoulder, and I fired, not once, but 3 times in quick succession. The first round caught him square in the chest. I heard the wet thump of the impact, saw his body recoil, a puppet with severed strings. The second shot caught him higher, and he crumpled, a lifeless heap. The third was pure overkill, tearing into the wall behind him. The acrid smell of gunpowder instantly filled the air, mingling with the metallic tang of fresh fear. Chaos erupted. His companions, caught completely off guard, panicked. I heard a choked cry, a curse. One scrambled, bolting for the front door. Another darted back toward the garage, their movements clumsy in their terror. My hand went to my hip, drawing the Walther PPQ. I didn't waste time on the first one. Let him run. I spun, tracking the one heading for the garage. He was almost out the interior door when I got a clean shot. The Walther barked twice, a grunt of pain, a stumble, and he went down. Not dead, but definitely out of the fight. My breath was coming in ragged gasps now, each one a burning rasp in my throat. I could feel the cold sweat plastering my hair to my forehead, dripping down my spine. The house, once silent, now rang with the echoes of gunfire, the frantic beat of my heart, and the distant, fading sound of someone running. Not finished. I didn't know how many there were, but I wasn't about to let the last one escape, not if they were coming back. Not if they knew who was here. Adrenaline was a raw, fiery current in my veins. My mind, usually clouded by cynicism, was sharpened to a razor's edge. I retrieved my SKS rifle from its place next to the Mossberg, heavier, longer, but with more reach. I sprinted through the house past the inert figure in the garage doorway and burst out into the night. The cold air hit me like a slap. My boots pounded on the damp earth as I ran, scanning the field. The black SUV was still there, a patient, dark presence, and a figure, a shadowy blur, was scrambling towards it, limping, clearly wounded. "Hey!" I yelled, my voice raw, ragged, carrying far across the open field. The figure paused, startled, then turned. I raised the SKS. There was no hesitation, no moral dilemma. This was survival. I squeezed the trigger. The rifle roared, a deeper, more resonant sound than the pistol or the shotgun. I fired until the figure went down, a final, lifeless collapse into the whispering grass. He didn't move again. My chest burned, lungs aching with the exertion. I stood there, legs trembling, the rifle heavy in my hands, scanning the desolate fields. Nothing. No more movement. Just the vast, indifferent darkness and the metallic tang of cordite on the wind. It was over. For now, by the time the sheriff's cruiser, a single, lonely beacon of blue and red, pulled up the long drive, the intruders lay motionless, their black SUV riddled with bullet holes. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth, gun smoke, and something else, something metallic and sickeningly sweet. I recounted the harrowing ordeal, my voice hoarse, my ears ringing, my body trembling as the adrenaline drained away, leaving me cold and hollow. The sheriff, a lean man with tired eyes, listened patiently, jotting notes. He looked at me, then at the bodies, then back at me. He didn't say much, just nodded, his gaze lingering a moment too long. "Self-defense," he mumbled, more to himself than to me. "Looks clear." Clear. Nothing was ever clear. They called in backup. More cruisers arrived, their flashing lights strobing across the fields, painting the scene in a macabre disco of red and blue. Paramedics, then a coroner. It was a whole damn party. I stood back, watching them work, a grim, detached observer. My hands were still shaking, but I forced them into the pockets of my jacket, a pathetic attempt at normalcy. I felt nothing but a profound weariness, a bone-deep exhaustion that threatened to pull me under. This was just another chapter in the long, bloody book of my life. Another house, another incident, another reason to pack up and keep moving. The phantom itch under my skin, the constant awareness of being watched, just got a fresh coat of paint. Days later, I returned to the house, an unspoken agreement with the sheriff to retrieve my belongings now that the forensic teams had cleared out. The police tape was gone, but the scent of antiseptic and something faintly sickly still clung to the air. The silence inside felt unnatural, like the house itself was holding its breath. Every creak of the floorboards, every sway of the curtains, brought back flashes of that terrifying night, as though the memories were etched into the very walls. It was a place forever changed, its transient safety replaced by an ominous stillness, a palpable sense of violated space. I walked through the rooms, the ghost of gunfire still echoing in my ears, picking up my few possessions. My go bag felt heavier than usual, each item a reminder of the life I'd chosen, or perhaps the life that had chosen me. As I crossed the threshold, about to step out for good, my phone buzzed, the cheap burner phone I use for these one-off jobs. The screen displayed an unknown number. My stomach twisted. I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the answer button. It was probably just the property management company, confirming my departure, or maybe the sheriff with some follow-up. But a colder, more primal part of my brain screamed, "Don't answer it!" My reluctant conscience, or maybe just a morbid curiosity, one out. Trembling, I answered. Only silence greeted me. Thick, empty, suffocating silence. I held the phone away from my ear, staring at the blank screen, then brought it back, pressing it tight against my ear. "Hello?" I muttered, my voice thin and reedy in the echoing emptiness of the house. Then, faint, barely a whisper, but clear as a bell, it came, a voice, dry, like rustling leaves, cold as a tombstone, and utterly devoid of anything human. "It's not over." The words sent an icy chill down my spine, a sensation that started in my coccyx and exploded into a million pinpricks across my skin. I stumbled back, dropping the phone. It clattered on the hardwood floor, a cheap plastic thing, now dark and lifeless. My breath quickened, ragged and shallow, as I stared at it, lying there like a forgotten toy. Had I imagined it? The ringing in my ears, the lingering adrenaline, the exhaustion. Was it just my mind playing tricks? No. The dread gripping my chest was too real, too visceral. It wasn't a trick. The house's shadows seemed to deepen, shifting as though alive, twisting into malevolent shapes in my peripheral vision. The air grew heavy, colder. A thought, ancient and terrifying, clawed its way into my mind. One I couldn't shake. The nightmare hadn't ended. It was waiting, watching. And it wasn't just these thugs. This was something else, something more. And I might never truly escape. The line went dead, the silence it left behind more terrifying than any scream. I picked up the phone, shoved it into my pocket, and walked out the door. Not looking back. Another town. Another job. Another haunting. The Chronicles of Leo Vance had just begun. Character count, 9,879. The rhythmic thud crunch echoed in the sterile chamber of my memory, replaying over and over. Not just the first sickening impact that rearranged my face, but the second one, the one that happened when I was already down, already broken. My own choked moan, a pathetic, half-formed sound, was the cue. Her arm, a blur of cold intent. The cast iron pan, a black void rushing towards me. That wasn't self-defense. That was an executioner's final, deliberate blow, delivered with the cold precision of a butcher. And I, like the fool I was, had recorded it all. I squeezed my eyes shut, the phantom pain in my jaw a dull, constant ache. She was due back any minute. The house, once a temporary refuge, now felt like a death trap, and the woman who owned it, the quiet, unnervingly calm woman who had tended to me in the hospital, was the spider in the web. My old analog wristwatch, a relic from a life I barely remembered, ticked loudly in the pre-dawn silence. 4:27 a.m. Not that the time mattered. It was more a nervous tick, a way to anchor myself to something concrete when the world around me felt increasingly like a bad dream. I was a ghost in my own life, drifting from one late night, off the books gig to the next, always a step ahead of whatever nameless dread followed me. This time, it was a house-sitting job in the quiet, manicured suburbs of some forgettable town, a temporary stay while the owner, an elderly woman named Mrs. Henderson, was in hospice. The pay was decent, off the books, and nobody asked questions. Perfect. The catch-in, of course, was Linda, Mrs. Henderson's niece, or something equally vague and familial. She was meant to be dropping by occasionally to check on things, but in reality, she'd pretty much moved in, claiming she felt closer to Aunt Carol here. I suspected she just liked the free rent and the distance from whatever life she'd been living. Linda was calm, too calm. Like a pond on a windless day, its surface utterly undisturbed, hiding unseen depths. She was 20-something, polite, pretty in a forgettable way, with eyes that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. She moved with an unsettling quietness, as if she were a component of the house's creaks and settling sighs rather than a person inhabiting it. I usually kept my distance, content to be the hired help, the invisible man. That was my modus operandi. Get in, get out, leave no trace. But Linda's placid demeanor grated on me in a way I hadn't anticipated. It wasn't just her lack of visible emotion, it was the absence of it. Most people, even the most stoic, had tell, a flicker in the eyes, a tightening of the lips, a minute shift in posture. Linda had none. Watching her, I felt like I was staring at a flawlessly rendered mannequin. My internal monologue, usually a sarcastic monologue of self-preservation, started trying to pick her apart. Waitori, what was she hiding? Or was she just empty? I'd seen empty before. Empty eyes on a snow-choked mountain pass, whispering promises that turned to ash. Empty promises from a smiling man with a carving knife hidden behind his back. The world was full of pleasant facades, and I was perpetually stuck behind the curtain, seeing the strings. One evening, I'd been in the kitchen, wiping down the countertops, part of my duties as the phantom caretaker. Linda was at the table, reading. A loud clang echoed through the house, the ancient furnace kicking on with a groan that sounded like a dying beast. I flinched, almost dropping my rag. Linda didn't even look up, just turned a page, her finger tracing the words. No visible reaction. My skin prickled. This wasn't normal. A few days later, I was outside, retrieving the mail. A small, yapping dog from next door had slipped its leash and darted into the street, narrowly missing a passing car. The dog's owner screamed. I braced myself for Linda's reaction. A gasp, a startled jerk. Anything. She was watering the hydrangeas by the porch. She paused, slowly turned her head toward the commotion, watched the near miss with an expression utterly devoid of concern, then turned back to her flowers, resuming her quiet, methodical task as if nothing had happened. My gut twisted. My world-weary cynicism usually allowed me to dismiss most human oddities as just that. Oddities. But this felt different. It felt wrong. It felt like the unnerving silence before the scream on that bus, or the way the air in the Sycamore Grove house had gone cold just before the fire. I started observing her more closely, almost compulsively. It wasn't about trying to make her react, as the original story's narrator had foolishly tried. It was about understanding. It was the survivor's gaze honed by a lifetime of horrors. I noticed the way she always stacked her dishes in precisely the same order on the drying rack. The way she folded laundry with an almost mechanical precision, each crease perfect. The way her eyes, when she wasn't actively looking at something, seemed utterly vacant, like windows to an empty room. The house itself, a two-story suburban standard, began to feel like a character in this unsettling play. Its walls, once a comforting shield of normalcy, seemed to press in, their silence amplifying Linda's unnatural calm. The air in the pantry, in particular, always felt a few degrees colder, a dead spot in the house's circulation. It had a high, narrow door, the top half a pane of clear, frosted glass, a relic from a time when pantries were meant to display their contents, not hide them. Now, it was just a dark maw, swallowing canned goods and forgotten dreams. My go-bag, always packed and within arm's reach, felt heavier with each passing day. My leather jacket, my second skin, felt less like armor and more like a target. I knew I should just leave. Finish the job, collect my meager pay, and vanish into the night, as I always did. My feet itched, but my reluctant conscience, that self-destructive spark of decency I cursed every day, kept me tethered. It wasn't about Linda. Not really. It was the house, the quiet dread it exuded, the feeling that something was deeply, fundamentally off. I'd been here before. That silent, creeping wrongness that clung to certain places like a shroud. I couldn't just walk away from it. Not yet. One night, the dread in the house was palpable. It seeped into the very fibers of the floorboards, chilled the air in my lungs. I hadn't slept well in days. The nightmares were returning. The crackle of fire, the screaming silence, the smell of burnt wood, and something far worse. Sycamore Grove, an echo from a childhood I barely remembered, was asserting its claim. I needed a distraction, something to ground me. I found myself in the dusty attic, ostensibly looking for spare light bulbs. Instead, tucked away in an old trunk filled with Mrs. Henderson's forgotten trinkets. I found it, a Halloween mask. Not a cheap plastic thing, but an old, heavy papier-mâché creation, painted with a grotesque, leering clown face, its eyes wide and vacant. It reeked of damp attic and something else. Something stagnant, like old fear, a strange impulse, irrational and compelling, seized me. I wasn't thinking of a prank. I was thinking of confronting the creeping dread that had settled in my bones. I put the mask on. The world narrowed, framed by the painted eyes. The air grew thick, as if the mask itself was breathing with me. I felt a surge of something, not courage, but a cold, almost detached clarity. My internal monologue, usually so sharp, dulled to a low hum. It was as if the mask was muting me, taking over. I stumbled back down to the kitchen, the mask feeling oddly heavy on my face. The pantry door beckoned, a sliver of darkness in the otherwise dimly lit room. My hand fumbled for the doorknob, its cold metal a shock against my skin. The pantry, a small, dark space, perfect for hiding or for watching. My battered mag light was clipped to my belt. My small digital camera, an old model I used to document strange things, not for social media, but for my own sanity, was in my pocket. I pulled it out. Record this, Leo. My usual self-deprecation was absent. This was a compulsion, to record the dread, to capture it, to contain it. I placed the camera on a high shelf, pointing roughly at the pantry entrance. The red recording light was a tiny, defiant eye in the gloom. I crouched, pulling the pantry door almost shut, leaving only a sliver open, a dark crack in the world. The air was cold, the darkness absolute inside the small space. I wasn't sure what I was waiting for. Maybe for the house to show its true colors, maybe for the mask to tell me something, or maybe I was just trying to feel something other than hollow dread. My analog watch glowed faintly in the darkness. Time stretched, elastic and slow. Every creak of the house, every distant siren, seemed amplified. Then I heard her, Linda's key in the lock, the soft click of the front door, her voice calling my name, devoid of warmth or urgency, just a flat, even tone. Leo, are you here? Her footsteps, unnervingly light, moving through the living room, heading towards the kitchen. My heart hammered against my ribs. A trapped bird. This was it. Whatever it was, I saw the kitchen light spill across the floor under the pantry door, heard the rustle of clothes, the clink of dishes. She was clearing the drying rack. I watched her through the small gap, her silhouette moving with that same eerie, deliberate calm. The clunk of a heavy object, the cast iron pan, no doubt. She always put it away last. A sudden, primal instinct, a surge of adrenaline I usually reserved for fleeing, overwhelmed me. It wasn't a joke, wasn't a prank. It was pure, unadulterated fight or flight, twisted by sleep deprivation and the oppressive atmosphere of the house. I wasn't trying to scare her. I was trying to break the silence, to make something happen. I roared, a guttural sound torn from my throat, and slammed my palms against the glass of the door, the clown mask a frozen snarl on my face. My vision was still limited by the mask, by the shattered light. The world seemed to tilt. The last thing I saw was the black, rounded bottom of that pan, impossibly large, impossibly fast, rushing towards my head. A solid thwack. My head snapped back. The world went black, then exploded in a kaleidoscope of pain and fractured light. The last coherent thought before oblivion. Of course, this is how it ends. Waking up was a slow, agonizing climb from a deep, dark well. The air smelled of antiseptic and something metallic, cloying. Hospital. My jaw ached with a dull, throbbing intensity. My nose felt like it had been punched by a freight train. My face, what little I could feel through the bandages and swelling, was a landscape of pain. My left eye was a blurry, bruised mess, a concussion. The doctors had explained with sterile detachment, a broken jaw, a shattered cheekbone, a fractured eye socket, lacerations from glass. I'd been lucky, they said. Lucky? The word tasted like ashes in my mouth. Linda was there, a quiet, reassuring presence. She looked distraught, in her own way, her eyes wide, her face pale. She sat by my bedside, holding my hand, her touch surprisingly gentle. She whispered apologies, her voice a low murmur. "I'm so sorry. Leo, I didn't know it was you. I just reacted. I thought someone was breaking in." I couldn't speak. My jaw wired shut. They gave me a notepad and a pen. My handwriting was shaky, but legible. "I forgive you." I wrote. Then, "Can you forgive me? Stupid prank." Her relief, though muted, was evident. She squeezed my hand, a flicker of something in her eyes. Gratitude? Remorse? It was impossible to tell. She was a closed book, a puzzle I'd accidentally kicked apart. The next few weeks were a blur of pain meds, bland hospital food, and the sterile hum of recovery. Linda was a devoted nurse. She brought me home-cooked meals, pureed so I could sip them through a straw. She read to me from books I didn't care about, told me stories about Mrs. Henderson, and generally just existed. She never left my side for long. My cynical mind kept searching for the crack in the facade, the moment her patience would wear thin, the flicker of resentment, but it never came. She was relentlessly, unnervingly composed. I found myself feeling something akin to gratitude, a foreign and unsettling emotion. Maybe I'd misjudged her. Maybe she was just a genuinely calm person, and my own trauma-addled brain was projecting malevolence where there was only an accidental tragedy. Once I was back in the house, a pale, stitched-up version of my former self, Linda's attentiveness only intensified. She wouldn't let me lift a finger, fussing over me with a quiet determination. She rarely left the house, citing my fragile condition. It felt less like care and more like surveillance. I chafed under it, the instinct to flee screaming in my veins. But I was still too weak, too bruised. My go-bag was still by the door, mocking me. My worn leather jacket hung on a peg, out of reach, its comforting weight a memory. The only thing that kept me sane was the thought of the camera, the small digital recorder, still hidden on the pantry shelf. It was the one piece of evidence, the one tangible link to what had truly happened. I had to get it. I had to see it. It was a morbid curiosity, a compulsion to confront the horror, to confirm what my gut already knew. The opportunity came, finally, after what felt like an eternity. "I'm just running to the grocery store." "Leo," Linda said, her voice soft, her eyes unreadable. "Be back in an hour or so. Call me if you need anything. All right?" She left, the door clicking shut with a finality that felt like a release. I moved with a slow, deliberate caution, my body protesting with every step. My face throbbed. The shattered pantry door had been replaced by a temporary sheet of plywood, but the memory of splintered glass and cold metal was vivid. I pushed the makeshift door open, the dim interior a familiar comfort. The air was still unnervingly cold. I reached up, my fingers brushing against the dusty surface of the shelf. And there it was, the camera, Still recording. Its battery dead. My heart hammered. This was it. The truth. I carried it back to my temporary bedroom, a spare room that felt more like a holding cell. I found the charger, plugged it in, and waited, watching the battery icon slowly fill. My hands trembled. This was the moment I'd prove myself wrong. Or prove myself right. I prayed for wrong. I expected right. The footage began. Me, in the awful clown mask, muttering to myself, a haunted man playing a childish game with his own fear. I looked pathetic. I looked crazy. This was the proof she needed to dismiss my injuries as an accident, a consequence of my own foolishness. A sick, twisted part of me almost wanted that. It was easier than the alternative. The kitchen light flickered on. Linda's silhouette, framed perfectly in the glass. She moved with that disturbing, quiet grace, collecting dishes. I watched, my breath caught in my throat, as she picked up the cast iron pan, its weight familiar in her hand. My silhouette jumped, a jarring movement in the frame, my mask a grotesque parody of menace. And then, the pan flew. It was fast, a blur of black against the pale kitchen wall. I saw her arm move, a swift, practiced motion. I saw the impact, felt the phantom pain blossom in my face. The camera shuddered as I fell, its lens now pointing at the floor, offering a blurry view of the pantry's dark corners. But then, the view shifted. She had bent down. Had she not? To retrieve the camera? No, the camera was still on the shelf. The shift was subtle, almost imperceptible. She moved to the broken door. Her face, framed by the jagged shards, was utterly blank. Her eyes were wide. Yes, her mouth slightly ajar, but there was no terror there. No surprise, only observation, like a scientist studying a specimen. She opened the pantry door. My prone, unmoving body was a heap on the dusty floor. The camera, still on the shelf, gave a perfect, albeit slightly tilted, view of her looking down at me. I counted the seconds. 20, 30, 45, nearly a full minute. She didn't move. She just stared. No sound from her, no gasp, no shudder, no indication of shock or remorse. Then she bent down. My breath hitched. Was she checking on me? Offering aid? My heart pounded, a sick, frantic drum. When she straightened, her hands were no longer empty. She held the cast iron pan, the same pan that had just knocked me out. My mind screamed, "No, no, it wasn't an accident. Not this." She turned the pan, adjusting her grip, her right hand taking the handle. Her arm rose, not in defense, but with a horrifying, deliberate slowness, to waist height, and then she waited. My internal monologue, usually so active, was silenced by pure, unadulterated terror. The camera's timestamp ticked on, 15 seconds. Then I heard it, a faint, pathetic sound. My own voice, a low, drawn-out moan, barely audible. I must have been coming to, stirring in the darkness. Only then did she move. The camera, unblinking, captured it all. Her arm arced upward, a smooth, powerful swing, drawing back over her shoulder. The pan whistled through the air, a sound I hadn't remembered before, a predatory whisper. Then the sickening thud, the crunch, the sound of bone, my own bone, broken. Deliberately, she didn't linger. No pause to assess the damage. She simply turned, walked back into the kitchen. I heard the faint rush of water, presumably rinsing the blood from the pan, then the familiar clunk as it was returned to the drying rack. The quiet, domestic sounds were a terrifying counterpoint to the violence I had just witnessed. Another 30 seconds. Then her voice, faint but clear, from another room. "Yes, an ambulance. My friend has had an accident." Her voice was still calm, still flat, no urgency, no panic. She was a perfect actress, or not an actress at all. She was just like that, a monster wearing human skin. The video ended, the battery finally flat. I sat there, the camera a cold, dead weight in my trembling hands. The room felt colder, the silence louder. My jaw throbbed, a constant reminder of her precision. She wasn't just calm, she was a predator, efficient and utterly devoid of empathy. The lack of sound, the deliberate second hit, the chillingly normal call for help. Linda would be back soon, the car door closing, the gentle click of the front door. She would call my name, that soft, unnerving voice, and I would have to answer. The phantom taste of blood filled my mouth. I had survived so many things, impossible horrors, human monsters, the echoes of a burning house. But this felt different. This was the monster hidden in plain sight, the one who didn't scream or roar, but smiled and waited, poised to strike. I was still weak, still vulnerable. My go bag felt a million miles away. My watch ticked, a countdown to her return, and I knew, with a bone-deep certainty, that this quiet suburban house, this place I had sought for anonymity and peace, was just another cage. Character count: 9,187 characters. The world spun, a kaleidoscope of stale bookstore air and the scent of ozone, as the alien proboscis plunged into my neck. It wasn't the pain that seized me, though it was sharp, like a hot needle twisting beneath the skin, but the icy, impossible cold that spread from the puncture, a feeling utterly divorced from anything human. My vision blurred, colors bleeding at the edges, and then the cold gave way to a sickening warmth, a burning river coursing through my veins. Something foreign, something old, was being pumped into me, and with every pulsing throb, I felt my very essence, my stubborn, cynical self, begin to dissolve, to warp into something else. My knees buckled, the floor rushing up to meet me, but before the darkness took hold, I heard their ghoulish laughter, two voices merging into a single, derisive harmony, echoing in the cavern of my suddenly empty skull. That was the end of the day. But like most truly awful days in my life, it started somewhere much more mundane, somewhere utterly unremarkable. It started, as so many of my misfortunes seemed to, with a bad decision, a lingering sense of obligation, and a perfectly dreadful Valentine's Day morning. The diner was a grease-slicked monument to poor life choices and cholesterol, a flickering fluorescent tomb where the air hung heavy with the ghosts of burnt bacon and stale coffee. I was halfway through a breakfast bowl that tasted mostly of regret and institutional eggs, my face deliberately aimed at the chipped formica tabletop, trying to maintain some semblance of peace. My worn leather jacket, a second skin and a shield against the world, felt like a comforting weight on my shoulders. I was just another ghost in the machine, another anonymous face seeking a cheap meal before heading to whatever soul-numbing night shift I'd managed to scrounge up this week. Today, it was stacking boxes in a dimly lit warehouse, a job that promised solitude, if nothing else. But even a ghost can't escape the pervasive, nauseating saccharine sweetness of Valentine's Day. And these two, a couple, naturally, had decided the empty diner was the ideal stage for their nauseating performance of affection. They'd plopped themselves down at the table immediately to my left, close enough that I could practically feel the warmth radiating from their cloying display. I hated public affection, especially when it felt so theatrical. It was like they were auditioning for a rom-com, or perhaps a particularly disturbing reality show about people who enjoyed inflicting emotional pain on others. They giggled, they cooed, they made exaggerated gestures of devotion that scraped against my already frayed nerves like sandpaper. My internal monologue, usually a quiet hum of self-deprecation, began to chant, "Just eat your damn eggs. Vance, don't engage. Don't even look." But I'm a creature of habit, And unfortunately, one of those habits is my fatal flaw, a reluctant, deeply regrettable conscience that chafes against my cynical exterior. Despite my best efforts to ignore them, the cloying sweetness became too much, curdling into something almost acidic in my gut. I finally lifted my head, fixing them with what I hoped was a glare sharp enough to etch glass. A simple, silent plea for them to dial back the performative romance by, say, 99%. The woman caught my eye, and instead of shrinking, instead of offering an apologetic half-smile, she smiled back, a full, bright, utterly unbothered smile. The man, sensing her attention had drifted, turned his head slowly, like a predator assessing its prey, and offered a similar expression. My blood ran cold, not from anger, but from a sudden, prickling unease. Their smiles weren't just polite, they were too wide, too perfect, like mass stretched over something else. Beneath the surface, I caught a fleeting glimpse of something else, a flicker of hostility, something far more potent and unsettling than any irritation I'd shown. It was the kind of smile that made the hair on my arms stand on end, the kind of subtle wrongness that my survival instincts, honed by years of running from things that defied explanation, instantly flagged. It reminded me, with a sickening jolt, of Olivia, the skin carpet lady, or Ethan, the cannibal who'd worn a charming grin as he lured his victims. Another pretty facade, another potential trap. My hand instinctively went to my old, analog wristwatch, tracing the cool metal of the bezel. Not for the time, never for the time, just a small, grounding tick. Just then, salvation arrived in the form of a waitress with a fresh pot of coffee. I practically lunged for my mug, grateful for the interruption, the momentary reprieve from those unsettling gazes. When she left, the couple had resumed their obnoxious snogging, their heads bent together in a show of intimacy that now felt less romantic and more predatory. I was too tired, too world-weary to re-engage. My only goal was to finish my pathetic breakfast and escape this Valentine's Day purgatory. I wolfed down the rest of my eggs, the taste of cheap butter and artificial smoke a welcome distraction from the mounting dread. As I made my way towards the counter to pay, navigating the grease-slicked floor with practiced ease, I overheard the woman's voice, cutting through the low hum of the exhaust fan. "Loners," she murmured, and the word hit me with the precision of a scalpel. There was no doubt she was talking about me. My feet, usually so eager to carry me away from trouble, froze. I turned, a fresh glare ready on my face, but she ignored me completely, her attention now fully on her partner. The man laughed, a low, guttural sound that seemed to rumble in his chest, either at her comment or at my undeniably awkward posture. I wasn't going to do anything, just wanted them to know I'd heard, wanted to reclaim some sliver of dignity, but they just kept on, as if I were invisible, or perhaps beneath their notice. The waitress, bless her soul, must have caught the tail end of the interaction, or seen the dangerous tension in my shoulders. "Ready to pay, hun?" she called out, her voice a welcome siren song. I nodded, pulling my gaze away from the infuriating couple. I paid, throwing in a few extra bucks as a tip, a peace offering for the scene I'd almost, but not quite, caused. Still, I felt the couple were the real culprits. I pushed through the glass door, the cool morning air a balm on my flushed face. Freedom. Almost. I was almost out. "Hey, you!" The woman's voice was surprisingly sharp, slicing through the din of the street. I cursed under my breath. "Damn it, Vance, you just had to look, didn't you?" My feet, despite every instinct screaming at them to keep moving, somehow turned. She was rising from their table, moving with a fluid grace that seemed out of place in the dingy diner. As she approached, I found myself struck by her beauty, something I'd completely missed in my agitation. It wasn't just physical attractiveness. It was an almost unsettling perfection, like staring into a blinding light. Her features were too refined, her eyes too piercing, radiating an unshakable confidence that felt less human and more like a predator's poise. "We saw that you were alone," she said, her voice soft, yet it seemed to fill the entire space, blocking out the traffic noise, the distant sirens. "You don't have to be, not today. You're free to come with us, if you'd like. We're just going around town, enjoying the day." I stood there, mouth agape, caught like a rabbit in a snare. My mind screamed, "Run." My past experiences with kindness from strangers, Ethan, the smiling cannibal, immediately sprang to mind, his jovial facade chilling me even now, screamed danger, but my lips, traitorous things, formed a meek nod. It wasn't entirely a conscious choice. There was a subtle compulsion, a whisper against the edges of my sanity, making refusal feel utterly impossible, like a string being pulled. The man, who had been facing away, apparently sensed my acquiescence. He rose from his seat, turning with the same unnerving grace, and joined us. He paid for their meal, a crisp bill slapping onto the counter, and then the three of us stepped out into the harsh Valentine's Day sunshine. Great, Vance, I thought, a bitter taste in my mouth. Another fine mess you've gotten yourself into. This is exactly why you stay in your bunker. I was lucky in a twisted sort of way, that I had no other plans. Otherwise, I would have abandoned them without a second thought, no matter who they were. My go bag was back at the motel, always packed, always ready, a testament to my transient, always on the run existence. Part of me wished I'd just grabbed it and driven until the gas tank was dry. My analog watch, usually a comfort, felt heavy on my wrist, a constant reminder of the passing time, each second ticking away my chances of escape. We spent a few hours drifting through the town, a surreal, unsettling tableau. We browsed quaint shops, bought a few trinkets, a cheap keychain I didn't want, a novelty pen I'd never use. Their forced conviviality, a thin veil over the unnerving undercurrent I sensed from them. They told me little about themselves, only that they were visitors from somewhere in old Europe. The phrase hung in the air, vague and unsettling, hinting at something ancient and profound that my tired brain couldn't quite grasp. Instead, they focused on me, their questions like probing fingers, dissecting my life, circling back repeatedly to the gaping void of my solitude on Valentine's Day. I felt a familiar flush of embarrassment, a prickle of shame that I tried to bury under layers of sarcasm. "Never felt the need," I mumbled, my voice rougher than usual. "It's just another day, another Hallmark holiday designed to make lonely people feel worse." It sounded weak, even to my own ears. They offered the expected, "That's fair." And the topic shifted, but not entirely. The woman would occasionally point out random women walking past, her eyes assessing, analytical, asking if I found them beautiful. The man would laugh, a low, rumbling sound. There was no mockery in it, no overt animosity like I'd felt back at the diner. Just an odd interest, like a scientist observing a specimen. The awkwardness was palpable, but not more than I'd expect from such a bizarre encounter. Still, my skin crawled. This wasn't normal. Nothing in my life ever was. It felt like the prelude to another one of those inexplicable horrors, the kind that had shadowed my every step since that night in Sycamore Grove, the night I'd escaped a fire, but had been marked by something far worse. Things took a definitive turn for the worse when we entered a bookstore. My stomach tightened. Bookstores, with their quiet corners and hushed reverence for the written word, were supposed to be safe. But then again, so were isolated mountain roads, quiet diners, and friendly neighbors, until they weren't. I remembered the man in the walls, the imposter Mitch, who'd lived in plain sight. Safety was an illusion, a lie I kept telling myself. The bookstore was predictably teeming with couples, their saccharine whispers and hand-holding a stark contrast to my growing apprehension. My companions, however, seemed perfectly at home, grabbing cups of coffee from the attached cafe, their movements fluid and unhurried as they wandered among the aisles. I'd had enough caffeine at the diner to fuel a small army, so I declined, opting instead to follow a few paces behind, trying desperately not to look like the pathetic third wheel I so clearly was. It took me a few moments, my observational skills dulled by the constant vigilance of the past few hours, but I eventually noticed a pattern. They were slowly, deliberately meandering through the history, mythology, and ancient cultures sections, their focus particularly drawn to European texts. Old Europe, the phrase echoed in my mind. I tried to decipher their interest, to pinpoint their exact heritage. But before I could piece anything together, the man turned to me, a smile already forming on his lips. "You know," he said, his voice a low purr that seemed to vibrate in my chest. "While this is all interesting and informative from a general perspective, there really isn't anything here that'll tell you the full truth of it, of us. You know?" I stared at him, my mind a blank slate. "What do you mean?" The question felt foolish even as I uttered it. His smile widened, a perfectly normal, friendly expression, and yet, there it was again, that subtle, darker meaning beneath the surface, the malevolence barely contained by a thin veneer of humanity. It was like looking at a beautifully painted canvas, knowing there was something hideous scrawled on the wall behind it. My heart, already a nervous drum against my ribs, quickened its pace. It felt like an anvil suddenly dropped into my chest. And as if he'd heard the frantic thumping, the man's eyes flickered down, straight to my chest. For the briefest, most horrifying second, the mask slipped. The friendly smile stretched into something monstrous, inhuman. His face seemed to shift, flesh rippling, eyes widening, and a once dormant malice flared to the surface, a primordial hunger that chilled me to the bone. It wasn't exactly demonic, not in the traditional sense, but there was a profound wrongness about it, an ancient, alien quality that made every cell in my body scream, "Flee." My legs, suddenly heavy and unresponsive, tried to move, but the solid wall of a bookshelf behind me stopped my pathetic attempt at retreat. Panic, cold and sharp, seized my limbs, freezing me in place. But then, as quickly as it appeared, the monstrous expression vanished. His face relaxed, the smile softening back into something no more threatening than a mischievous friend. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice genuinely concerned, devoid of any ironic inflection. The switch was so sudden, so seamless, it made my head spin. I wanted to scream, to run, to push past him and sprint into the street until my lungs burned. But some perverse part of me, that reluctant conscience, that fatal flaw, felt compelled to answer. "I'm fine. Yeah," I choked out, the words tasting like ash. My heart still hammered, a frantic drum solo in my chest, threatening to burst through my ribs. But his gaze, thankfully, had shifted back to mine. He nodded, then beckoned me to follow him. And I did, like a lamb to slaughter, like every poor bastard in every horror story I'd ever heard. We caught up to his partner, who had gravitated, predictably, to the horror section. She was engrossed in a book of old supernatural tales, her back to us, completely oblivious to my recent near-death experience. The man moved behind her, his hands settling possessively on her hips as he leaned over her shoulder, their heads bent in a mirror image of their earlier diner intimacy. Every few moments, low chuckles rumbled between them. Curiosity, that insidious, self-destructive trait that always gets me into trouble, tugged at me. I edged closer, straining to see the open pages. The story, as best as I could make out, was about blood drinkers, not the refined, aristocratic vampires of popular fiction, but something far more feral, ancient, and utterly monstrous. The kind of thing that probably stalked the dark corners of old Europe, The kind of thing that made my stomach churn with a primal fear I knew all too well. This wasn't some fantasy. This was a warning. After a while, they closed the book, their laughter echoing eerily in the quiet bookstore, and began to wander off again. I followed, a puppet on invisible strings, somehow knowing they expected me to. They headed towards a section of the bookstore cordoned off by yellow tape, an area undergoing renovation. The walls were bare, freshly painted, and the space around a corner was completely deserted, cut off from the main flow of foot traffic. An alarm blared in my head, a primal, lizard-brained warning, echoing the terror I'd felt hiding from the mirrored doppelganger in that wretched motel. Don't follow them. Vance, turn around. Go home. Call Buster. Pretend this never happened. But another impulse, stronger, colder, and utterly alien, suppressed that basic survival instinct. It felt like something had been implanted in my mind, a subtle suggestion, a silent command that bypassed all rational thought. I rounded the corner. I still can't figure out how they managed to transform so quickly. It must have taken 5, maybe 6 seconds, the time it took for me to walk those few paces, to turn that corner. But in that infinitesimal span, they had become something else entirely, something less than human, yet undeniably more, older than mankind, certainly, but also more evolved, more refined in their savagery. They were horrific, almost identical in their new forms, though the woman retained her female characteristics, and the man his. Their bodies had broadened, swelling to nearly the width of the bookshelves that now lined the hallway behind them. Their eyes, once so piercing, had migrated further to their temples, giving them a disturbing, fish-like appearance above their now pointed noses. Their skulls had distended, ballooning to a nauseating size, lumpy and asymmetrical. The blonde hair they'd worn so casually was inexplicably gray, hanging in withered clumps from their grotesque scalps. They stood with bestially arched backs and hunched shoulders, like proto-men resurrected from some ancient, forgotten nightmare. But their narrow-eyed expressions, devoid of anything resembling warmth, bespoke a callous, alien intellect. Their clothes, in which had seemed so normal moments before, were now taut in some places, stretched to the point of tearing, and loose in others, hanging awkwardly from their mutated forms. Fresh blood stains marred the fabric, as if the transformation itself had caused their skin to burst, or tear in the process. The air around them grew heavy, stale, a cloying scent like old meat and damp earth. My stomach churned, a knot of pure revulsion tightening in my throat. They were abominable things, and yet I couldn't tear my gaze away. I was paralyzed, awestruck by their grotesque beauty, terror-stricken by the absolute certainty that had dawned upon me. From the moment they had laid eyes on me in that diner, I had been under their monstrous thrall. They hadn't invited me, they had summoned me, just like the pig creature had summoned me, just like the whispers in the walls had called me closer. I was a magnet for this horror, doomed to stumble from one nightmare to the next. No one should be alone on this day. Their voices, perfectly synchronized, echoed in the small, confined space, a resonant, ghoulish harmony that might have belonged to a reclusive crypt keeper, or perhaps the dead he kept. The woman's mouth, which, somehow, had become utterly lipless, a raw, puckered slit in her transformed face, opened. From it, a long, red-veined, pulsing flesh tube extended, like an insect's proboscis, thick and glistening. I watched, my eyes wide with horror, as it snaked through the air towards me, its tip twitching. My body was a cage, my limbs unresponsive. I could do nothing but whimper sheepishly, a pathetic, animal sound, as the appendage touched my neck, cold and clammy, yet pulsing with an inner life. Remembering the old tales in the book they'd laughed at, the ones about blood drinkers, a desperate, pathetic plea bubbled up. Don't. "Don't drink my blood," I croaked, the words barely audible, assuming they were some horrifying precursor to the vampires of myth. They laughed, a raw, hoarse, ghoulish sound that scraped against my eardrums, echoing in the small, enclosed space. The woman impossibly laughed, despite the grotesque tube still extending from her mouth. The sound sent a stifling chill down my spine, silencing my whimper, paralyzing my very soul. It was the laughter of gods, or devils, playing with their food. The man, his ungodly face stretched into a terrible smile, spoke, his voice a low, rumbling bass. "Dear, could you imagine if we drank blood? If we needed to subsist on that vile stuff?" The woman, her tubular tongue still dancing around my neck, probing, exploring, replied, "Oh, I'd just give it all up. What a dreadful life. That'd be..." They let loose another round of that awful, rattling laughter, and my soul, already shrunken to a withered pea, seemed to shrink further, twisting in upon itself. I was nothing, a plaything. "No, I'm not going to drink your blood, child. I'm going to give you some of mine." Just then, a searing, stabbing pain flared in my neck as the proboscis went rigid, its tip burrowing deeper. A violent, rhythmic pulsing began, a sensation utterly alien and invasive, and I felt something being steadily pumped into me. My vision blurred, the bookstore shelves swaying around me. I swooned as if suddenly, deeply intoxicated, my brain swimming in a dizzying haze. Something foreign, something utterly wrong, was coursing through my veins, paradoxically chilling and warming me at the same time. My skin prickled with 1,000 needles. My muscles twitched involuntarily. I felt feverish, drunk, physiologically unstable, my very cells rebelling against the alien intrusion. It was a violation far deeper than any physical wound, a violation of my very consciousness. It felt like the universe itself, the same malevolent force I'd glimpsed on that farm, was reaching inside me, twisting something vital. The proboscis withdrew, a wet, sucking sound. The woman slurped it back into her mouth with a disgusting, vein-streaked schlorp, like a noodle. My legs, suddenly devoid of strength, gave way. I hit the floor with a dull thud, the impact jarring my teeth, just as their de-transformation began, their grotesque forms shimmering, shrinking, resolving back into the horrifyingly familiar faces of the couple from the diner. I was gently shaken awake by a bookstore employee, their face etched with concern. I saw their phone in their hand, the 911 screen glowing, though they hadn't yet pressed call. Still dazed, my head swimming with the lingering phantom sensations of alien fluid in my veins. I looked around for the nightmare couple, but saw only a small crowd of concerned customers, their faces a blur of worried expressions. My mind, desperate to believe it had all been some fever dream, some hallucination brought on by exhaustion and Valentine's Day cynicism, seized onto the normalcy. I assured everyone I was fine, that I'd just had a dizzy spell. The bookstore employee helped me stand, their touch gentle, almost deferential. I mumbled my thanks, my voice hoarse, and stumbled out of the store, finally listening to that deep-seated, lizard-brained warning that screamed at me to get out, to run, to flee. The cold street air hit me, a shock to my system. I walked, then ran, until my lungs burned, not stopping until I was back in the sterile, temporary comfort of my motel room, the heavy mag light from my go bag clutched in my hand. Buster, my scruffy companion, was curled up on the scratchy motel bedspread, his tail thumping a soft welcome. His presence was a small, steady anchor in a world that consistently tried to rip me apart. I desperately wished I'd stayed with him. I went straight to the bathroom, flipping on the harsh fluorescent light. I didn't bother wiping away the tears that streamed down my face. I had, after all, been stabbed, violently probed with something ancient and vile. There, in my neck, was a small, angry red puncture wound, rimmed with a weird, purplish ring from which trailed similarly colored streaks, like some bizarre bacterial infection or a spreading toxin. It looked unnatural, like a brand. It's been 3 hours since confirming the wound, and I've started hearing her voice. It's subtle at first, a faint whisper at the back of my mind, then growing stronger. She calls to me, across a distance that seems both vast and incredibly close, offering words of comfort and praise. Sometimes it sounds like a mother's soothing tones, other times like a lover's intimate murmurs. And a strange, unsettling feeling of affection has begun to blossom in my heart, a longing for a companionship whose nature feels disturbingly inhuman. I don't even know her name. They never told me, and I never bothered to ask, lost in my own cynical self-pity. And yet, I'm starting to think that I love her, that I need her, and that she feels the same way about me. It's like she's a part of me now, a parasitic thought, a new layer of trauma grafted directly onto my soul. This is worse than the screams from the bus, worse than the imposter wearing Mitch's face. This is inside me. I have always felt alone and bitter on Valentine's Day. I don't feel that way anymore. That's the real horror. Character count, 9847. The ceramic mug felt impossibly heavy in my hand, the lukewarm tea inside a mocking promise of warmth. Alice's voice, sweet and laced with feigned concern, echoed from the kitchen window. "Honey, I made you some tea." But her words were a death knell, each syllable a blade twisting in a gut already churning with dread. My eyes darted from the opened life insurance policy, bearing her signature, to the crumpled love letter addressed to another, and finally, to the scarred, silent man vanishing into the alley's shadows. He had just shown me my executioner, and she was waiting, a porcelain cup of poison held out like a peace offering. This wasn't just a betrayal. It was a carefully plotted, domestic horror, far more insidious than any screaming specter or clawed beast. My old analog watch, a dull weight on my wrist, felt colder than the winter air, marking time I might not have. Funny, isn't it? How you try to outrun the darkness, only to build a comfortable little cage for yourself and invite it in. I'd spent years on the move, a human tumbleweed, convinced that constant motion was the only way to stay ahead of the things that clawed at the edges of my perception, the things that haunted my waking hours and chased me through my nightmares. The phantom whisper of a dead man in a snow-choked mountain pass, the glint of a knife in a charmer's hand, the grotesque artistry of a living skin rug, the constant awareness that something might already be inside the walls, wearing a familiar face. These were the layers of my existence, the map of my trauma. But then there was Alice, a brief, misguided detour into the treacherous landscape of normalcy, and a house that promised a fragile, temporary truce. A truce that was about to turn into a war I hadn't seen coming. I met Alice during one of my longer stints as a night watchman at a deserted industrial complex just outside Sacramento. She was a software engineer, surprisingly cheerful, with a laugh that, for a while, almost made me forget the bitter taste of everything I'd seen. She talked about stability, about roots, about a future, words that usually sent me reaching for my go bag. But she wove them with such an earnest, almost desperate hope that a part of me, the part I usually kept locked away, started to listen. Maybe, I thought, just maybe, I could outrun the curse by simply stopping, by building a fortress of mundane, domestic banality. It was a stupid, inodie, suicidal idea, fueled by a craving for something resembling peace. Even Buster, my scruffy companion, seemed to be enjoying the brief lull in our nomadic existence, wagging his tail whenever Alice appeared. I'd left him with a friend in a quieter part of town, assuring him I'd be back soon, a promise I now realized had been dangerously naive. The world, as I'd learned repeatedly, has a way of reminding you how small and insignificant you really are. For Alice and me, it was the endless nights staring at spreadsheets, crunching numbers that never quite added up, feeling the weight of a future slipping away even as we tried to grasp it. 2 years ago, we decided it was finally time to buy a house. The rental market was bleeding us dry, a slow, agonizing exsanguination of our bank accounts. We knew it wasn't a buyer's market, but paying triple the cost of a mortgage for rent every month felt less like an investment and more like an active act of self-mutilation. "You know this story," I'd vented to Alice, a rare moment of shared cynicism. "You make all the right moves, go to college, pay off your loans, land a stable job, and then some corporate behemoth with pockets deeper than the Marianas Trench swoops in and prices you out of the city you grew up in." It was a common refrain, but hearing it from her gave it a strange weight. She sounded tired, a weariness I recognized in myself, and for a fleeting moment, I almost felt human connection. Almost. Still, after months of scouring online listings and losing bidding, war after bidding war to unseen, richer forces, we managed to snag a deal, albeit in what could only generously be described as the roughest neighborhood in town. The decision wasn't easy. My gut, that constant, low-frequency hum of warning, screamed at me to turn around, to get back on the road, to drive until the state lines blurred into oblivion. But desperation and dwindling options had a way of silencing even the most insistent internal alarms. This colonial, all 4,500 square feet of it, was the only house remotely within our budget, and the allure of finally owning a home, of planting some kind of flag in the shifting sands of my life, outweighed the area's reputation for crime and decay. We convinced ourselves it was a compromise we could live with, at least for a while. On June 1st, we moved into a relic of a bygone era. Its hardwood floors gleamed like aged amber under the afternoon sun, reflecting the intricate wedding cake plaster details on the ceiling. It was almost perfect. Almost, until we reached the basement. The realtor, a woman whose smile was too wide and whose eyes darted too quickly, had brushed it off as a fixer-upper opportunity. Her voice had a strange, almost practiced tremor when she said it. But the basement wasn't just unfinished. It was a damp crypt, a clammy maw of concrete and shadowed corners. Crude, childish drawings, or at least they looked childish, were scrawled across the walls, spirals that seemed to draw the eye into an infinite void, and stick figures with hollow, vacant eyes that seemed to watch me, unblinking, from the mold-stained plaster. They reminded me of something, a distant, half-forgotten terror, a primal fear buried so deep I couldn't articulate it. The taste of ash, the smell of burnt wood, a fleeting image of a flickering shadow against a wall. It all swam just beneath the surface of my consciousness, too vague to pinpoint, too persistent to ignore. "Kid," she had said with that strained, brittle smile, her gaze refusing to meet mine. "Fixing this up will really boost the resale value." Alice, bless her optimistic heart, had laughed nervously, and I forced a chuckle too, ignoring the faint, unnatural chill that seemed to emanate directly from the cement floor, a cold that bit deeper than any mere dampness. We had a home now, and for all its quirks, for all its lurking disquiet, it was ours, or so I told myself. It was a lie I needed to believe, if only for a little while. The neighborhood was something else entirely. It wasn't just rough, it was a living, breathing testament to urban decay. The shadow of the freeway, a concrete monster, loomed over us, casting a perpetual gloom, and the air was always thick with the acrid, metallic tang of burnt rubber, exhaust fumes, and something else, something I couldn't quite identify, but that tasted faintly of rust and old blood. The crime rates were high enough to be front-page news in a smaller town. But here, they were just background noise, a constant, low-grade hum of violence. Alice, ever the pragmatist, called it a stepping stone. Just 1 year, she promised, and we'd move somewhere better, somewhere safer. somewhere where the air didn't taste of impending doom. I didn't have the heart to tell her that our finances, already strained to breaking point, might keep us tethered to this concrete purgatory longer than she hoped. Despite everything, the neighbors were unusually friendly, almost overly so. It felt less like genuine warmth and more like a carefully constructed facade, a collective, performative camaraderie. There was an unspoken rule, an unwritten law etched into the very fabric of the streets. You get to know everyone. Safety in numbers, and I guessed. Or perhaps something more insidious. Everyone seemed to accept the unspoken truth. In this neighborhood, you looked out for each other because no one else would. And if you didn't, well, the implications were left chillingly unsaid. My observational skills, honed by years of navigating the fringe, picked up on the subtle flickers of anxiety in their eyes, the way their smiles didn't quite reach, the almost imperceptible tensing of their shoulders when the sun began to set. They were like prey animals, huddling together, waiting for the predator. We tried to turn fear into a game, a desperate attempt to normalize the abnormal. At night, we'd hear distant cracks echo through the labyrinthine streets, sharp and definitive. "Fireworks or gunshots?" Alice would ask, her voice trying for casual, but with an underlying tremor that gave her away. It became a macabre tradition, a dark ritual to punctuate the mundane. Just like pointing out massive, amorphous droppings on the sidewalks and guessing, human or dog. But those games got old fast. The gunshots always carried that distinct, sharp crack of a bullet shattering the sound barrier, a jarring, sickening contrast to the lighthearted tone of our grim little game. And the droppings? Well, let's just say we hadn't seen any dogs large enough to leave such landmines. They were too large, too unnatural. The first time I truly looked at one, not just dismissed it, a cold dread snaked up my spine. It was fibrous somehow, with something that glinted like bone fragments. I didn't mention it to Alice. Some things were better left unsaid. The local homeless population was omnipresent, a silent, shuffling current of humanity that flowed through the streets. Yet, they were eerily ignored by most residents, treated like inconvenient ghosts, less than human. A glance averted, a hurried step, a pretense of not seeing, but I couldn't do that. Maybe it was the reluctant conscience, that little spark of decency I wished I could snuff out, but I couldn't just pretend they weren't there. I'd smile, nod, or sometimes, against my better judgment, exchange pleasantries when I passed them, a quiet acknowledgement of their existence. It felt like breaking some unspoken rule of the neighborhood, stepping across an invisible line. But the alternative, the sheer dehumanization of it all, was a horror I couldn't stomach. What would happen if I didn't acknowledge them? The thought, fleeting and cold, often pricked at the back of my mind. One night, later than usual, after Alice and I had finished a late movie, I found myself at the kitchen sink, washing the popcorn bowl. The window above the sink overlooked our backyard, which bordered a thicket of woods. The glass, reflecting my face in the dim kitchen light, obscured most of the yard, but not all of it. A dark, impossibly still shape caught my eye. It wasn't a tree stump. It was too tall, too rectilinear, too human. The silhouette loomed unnaturally motionless among the gnarled buckthorn, its edges blurred by the faint swaying of the trees in the relentless, chill wind. My breath hitched, caught in my throat like a shard of ice. The air in the kitchen, already cool, seemed to drop several degrees, growing sharp with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, a scent that tasted of the grave. The figure's head tilted slightly, almost imperceptibly, a slow, deliberate movement as though it was studying me in return, analyzing me. A chill, primal and ancient, ran down my spine, tracing the path of my vertebrae like a spider. My breath hitched again, a desperate gasp for air that wouldn't come. I swayed slightly, trying to see past my own pale reflection. past the flickering fluorescent light, and there he was. A man stood motionless among the buckthorn, his face hidden in the impenetrable shadows of the thicket. He was staring straight at me, his gaze an invisible, crushing weight. My heart, a terrified bird, leapt against my ribs. The ceramic bowl slipped from my hands, crashing with a muffled clatter into the porcelain sink, the sound startlingly loud in the sudden, oppressive silence of the house. "You okay, honey?" Alice called from the living room, her voice tinged with casual concern, the kind that barely brushes the edges of real worry, a sound of mundane normalcy that was now utterly alien. In that moment, a wave of guilt, sharp and unexpected, mixed with the dread that was now coiling in my gut. My heart hammered so loudly I thought she might hear it, a frantic drumbeat against the silence. The sheer ordinariness of her question contrasted sharply with the unreal, terrifying sight outside, making me hesitate, a split second of agonizing indecision before I could respond. "Yeah," I lied, the word a dry whisper against my parched throat. I didn't want to scare her, didn't want to drag her into the impossible strangeness that had just manifested itself in our backyard. Just taking the trash out. The lie tasted like ash. Without grabbing the trash, without even thinking to grab a coat, I stepped out into the backyard. The wind, now whipping with a sudden, unnatural intensity, rustled the branches of the buckthorn, making them sway like skeletal hands beckoning me closer, deeper into the encroaching darkness. The air felt colder than it should have, biting through my thin sweatshirt, a raw, aggressive cold that seemed to leach the heat directly from my bones. The quiet was absolute, a heavy, smothering blanket that pressed down on my eardrums. "Hello." My voice was small, thin, barely audible above the rising wind. The man didn't move. He was a statue carved from shadow and dread. "What do you want?" I took a tentative step forward, my old worn leather jacket still draped over the kitchen chair, feeling miles away. My hand instinctively went to my wrist, my thumb tracing the cool metal of my analog watch. Then I froze, a sudden jolt of adrenaline shooting through my veins, as the motion light, mounted high on the back of the house, flicked on with a soft click and a sudden, blinding burst of artificial daylight. The figure moved, finally, stepping out of the absolute blackness and into the stark, revealing glare. He was impossibly tall, easily 7 feet, wrapped in a heavy wool overcoat that fell to his ankles, a dark shroud that seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it. His face was gaunt, deeply lined, a landscape of suffering, and a jagged, angry scar ran horizontally across his throat, a grotesque, morbid smile that twisted his entire countenance. Slowly, deliberately, he stretched out an enormous hand, palm open, resting in its calloused center, stark against his weathered skin, was a single, empty pill capsule, white, generic, utterly unremarkable, and utterly terrifying. "I don't have any drug," I stammered, my voice cracking, the lie about the trash still heavy on my tongue. My mind raced, trying to find a logical explanation, any explanation that didn't involve the monstrous, impossible figure standing before me. "Do you want me to take this?" He didn't answer. He couldn't. Instead, he opened his mouth, revealing the mutilated, puckered stump where his tongue had been. The jagged edges of scar tissue glistened faintly in the pale light, a grotesque, silent testament to some unimaginable violence. He mouthed words silently, his lips moving with agonizingly slow, deliberate care, forming sounds that never materialized. His wide, shadowed eyes, however, brimmed with an emotion I couldn't name. Dread? Pity? Or was it something far darker? A warning, perhaps etched into his very being, communicated not with sound, but with the raw, visceral agony of his silent plea? The silence stretched, heavy and oppressive, as if the air itself carried the unbearable weight of secrets I wasn't meant to uncover. Secrets that threatened to crush me. My legs locked in place, rooted to the damp earth as he turned, his movements unnervingly fluid for such a large man, and melted back into the woods, the buckthorn branches swaying in his silent wake, closing around him like a hungry maw. I stood there, shivering, for what felt like hours, heart hammering against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird, before finally retreating inside. The taste of that cold, damp fear lingered on my tongue, a bitter residue. I checked my watch, not for the time, but for the comforting, mundane click of its gears, a tiny anchor in a world that had just been irrevocably tilted on its axis. The next day, still feeling the chill of that encounter, I asked around about him, trying to keep my questions casual, almost dismissive. Most people avoided the topic entirely, their eyes skittering away, their shoulders hunching, but two mechanics at the end of the block, their hands perpetually grimy with oil and grease, laughed when I tentatively brought him up, as if he were a local eccentricity, not a harbinger of silent dread. "You mean Tall Frank?" one said, wiping a rag across a greasy wrench. "Guy's been around forever, collects cans, quiet as the grave." He chuckled, a dry, rattling sound. "He's harmless," the other added, spitting a stream of tobacco juice onto the pavement. "Doesn't talk to nobody. Hell, he cut his own tongue out, you know? Rumor is he didn't want to risk saying something he'd regret." His eyes, however, lingered on mine a moment too long, a flicker of something unreadable in their depths, something that belied his casual tone. Their words didn't comfort me. Harmless or not, Tall Frank wasn't just a ghost of the neighborhood, a harmless eccentric. He knew things. Things about me, things about this house, things that were coming, the silence of his tongue, the gaping wound. It felt less like a choice and more like a forced sacrifice. He was a silent sentinel, a broken prophet of the unspoken horrors that festered beneath the veneer of this neighborhood's normalcy. And the empty pill capsule, it was a message, chillingly specific. A week passed, a slow, agonizing crawl of days filled with a growing sense of unease. My sleep became restless, haunted by fragmented images of hollow-eyed stick figures in a towering, silent man. My health, too, began to decline. My heart raced for no reason, a frantic drum against my ribs, even when I was just sitting still. My head throbbed with a dull, persistent ache, a drum that echoed the frantic beat of my own blood. I dismissed it as stress, a bad flu, anything but the gnawing suspicion that had taken root the moment I saw that empty capsule. One night, the dull throb in my head now a hammering migraine. I filled a teapot at the kitchen sink, hoping the steam might clear my head. The window was a dark mirror, reflecting only the dim light of the kitchen. But then, a faint disturbance in the reflection, a ripple in the darkness outside. I saw him again. He stood in the same spot among the buckthorn, a century of shadows watching me. This time, there was no hesitation, no fear-induced paralysis, only a cold, desperate anger, fueled by the growing certainty that my strange illness was not a coincidence. I stormed outside, the screen door slamming behind me with a violent crack. "What do you want?" I yelled, my voice raw, ragged, echoing into the oppressive quiet of the night. He turned slowly, deliberately, his movements almost too graceful for his size, like a dancer in a macabre ballet. He didn't speak. He couldn't. Instead, he simply gestured, a slow sweep of his massive, gloved hand for me to follow. His movements were unhurried, as if he had all the time in the world, as if he knew, with grim certainty, that I would obey. Despite every instinct screaming at me to stop, to turn and run, to call Alice and flee, I did. My reluctant conscience, that cursed, bleeding heart, dragged me forward. What if he was trying to warn me about something? What if he was the key to understanding the things that kept finding me? kept latching onto my life. My old leather jacket, I realized with a grim smile, was less a piece of armor and more a uniform for the perpetually doomed. He led me through the overgrown brambles of the backyard, through a gap in the dilapidated fence I hadn't noticed, and into the narrow, forgotten alley behind my house. The air here was even colder, thick with the stench of garbage and damp concrete. He stopped in the deepest part of the shadows, where the light from the street lamps barely pierced the gloom. Then, without a word, he handed me 2 envelopes. They were worn, crumpled, as if they'd been carried for a long time. My hands trembled as I took the first. It contained a love letter, not to me, from Alice to someone else. My chest tightened, a cold, crushing weight as I read her words, each one a dagger twisting in my gut. Flowery prose, promises of a future, dreams of escape from this dreadful place, all addressed to a name that wasn't mine. The betrayal, stark and visceral, hit me with the force of a physical blow. The hope I'd allowed myself, that fragile, ridiculous hope for normalcy, shattered into a million pieces. The second envelope was open, already. Inside was a life insurance policy, in my name, signed by her. My hands began to shake uncontrollably, the paper rustling like dead leaves. The realization washed over me like ice water, a tidal wave of terror and disbelief, stealing my breath, leaving me gasping in shallow, desperate gulps. For a moment, the world tilted, the grimy alley spinning. I had to steady myself against the cold, rough brick wall, its gritty surface digging into my palm, to keep from collapsing. My stomach dropped, a sickening lurch. She's trying to kill me? The words were barely a whisper, a question that was already an answer. The empty pill capsule from the other night, the constant nausea, the racing heart, it all clicked into place with horrifying clarity. Tall Frank, the silent sentinel. His scarred arm rested gently on my shoulder, a touch surprisingly tender for such a formidable man. There was no judgment in his eyes, only a profound ancient weariness, a shared understanding of the darkness that lurked in the most unexpected places. We sat there in silence, a strange, silent communion between 2 haunted men, until the kitchen light in my house, my supposed home, flickered on again. Alice stood at the window, a serene smile on her face, stirring something into a mug, her silhouette bathed in the warm, inviting glow. I could see her lips moving, silently rehearsing, no doubt, the words she would use to lure me back inside, to offer me the final, poison cup. Tall Frank nodded, his expression unreadable, a silent acknowledgement of the grim tableau. Then, with the fluid grace of a wraith, he vanished into the deeper shadows of the alley, leaving me alone with the chilling truth. Sometimes, I thought, the monsters in your neighborhood aren't the ones you should fear most. They're the ones who look like angels, who promise you a home, who hold a poisoned cup with a smile. As the days turned to weeks, a grim vigilance became my constant companion. I never touched the tea. I didn't confront Alice. I simply made excuses, feigned recovery, and made my arrangements. I couldn't trust her, couldn't live under that roof, knowing what I knew. Every creak of the floorboards, every shadow that stretched too long across the amber-gleaming hardwood, felt like a reminder that nothing was truly resolved, that danger still lingered, waiting to strike. I made my escape quietly, taking only what I could fit in my go-bag, leaving Alice and her poisoned tea to the house and its secrets. I never saw her again. I never saw Tall Frank again either. Not directly, at least, but his warning, his silent act of profound compassion, stayed with me, an indelible mark. One night, months later, holed up in a cheap motel outside Omaha, I found a note tucked under the doorframe of my room, slipped beneath a crack, written in jagged, shaky handwriting that I recognized instantly. The same hand that wrote the suicide letters I'd sometimes seen plastered on abandoned buildings. It read, "Protect the others." His warning, his plea, echoes in the lonely miles I now traverse. Every time I hear the echo of distant gunshots in a forgotten town, or spot a too-still shadow in the corner of my eye, I wonder if it's my turn to step into the darkness, to repay the debt of the life he spared me. Sometimes, saving a life means inheriting its curse, and sometimes, the truest horrors are the ones that wear human skin and wait for you in the warmth of your own home. Total character count, 9, 9, and 87. The hunger is a living thing inside me now, a raw, gnawing void that eclipses thought, reason, and any lingering echo of the man I used to be. It's a primordial beast, ancient and insatiable, and it's coiling in the ruins of what was once my stomach, demanding to be fed. My throat, a shredded, gaping ruin, offers no protest, only a cold, hollow awareness of its own absence. My body, or what's left of it, aches with a profound, unnatural fatigue, yet pulses with a frantic, eager energy. I lie here, deep in the damp embrace of the woods, a patch of matted leaves and cold earth pressed against what used to be my face, and I can feel them. Teenagers, young, vibrant, their life energy radiating through the trees like a distant, flickering campfire. They wander nearby, probably looking for cheap thrills, a quiet place to drink or whisper secrets, entirely oblivious to the new predator that has joined the shadows. The sky above is a bruise of twilight, a fitting backdrop for this grim, grotesque rebirth, and my old analog wristwatch, somehow still clinging to my wrist, tells me nothing of the time, only a silent, damning indictment of how far I've fallen. It all started, as these things always do, with a quiet night, a sense of false security, and a knock at the door that felt less like a greeting and more like a premonition. Just another transient stop in another nameless town, a forgettable rental house that was supposed to be a temporary haven from the ever-present gnawing dread of my own existence. I'd told Buster, my scruffy terrier mix, that this one felt clean. He'd given me that look, the one that said, "You say that every time, Leo." I'd left him with Mrs. Henderson, a sweet, slightly deaf lady from the next town over who adored him, telling myself I just needed a quiet night to recharge. Fool, I should have known better. Quiet nights are just the universe winding its spring for the next jump scare. I was settled in the kitchen, the cool Formica counter against my forearms, my laptop humming a low, monotonous tune as I scrolled through the endless, meaningless digital chatter of social media. Another Tuesday night, another round of staring at digital strangers living lives I actively avoided. Lives where the biggest worry was probably what to have for dinner, or if the new streaming show was any good. My life, by contrast, had become a masterclass in low-profile survival, a perpetual state of ready to bolt. I checked my old analog wristwatch out of habit, the battered leather strap a familiar comfort against my skin, the glass face reflecting the dim kitchen light. 10:01 p.m. Time to call it a night. Maybe try to coax some actual sleep out of my perpetually agitated brain before another round of graveyard shift grunt work. The knock came then, sharp and insistent, rattling the cheap veneer of normalcy I'd built around myself. It was too loud for a neighbor, too urgent for a delivery. My hand twitched, nearly sending my lukewarm tea, herbal, because even my caffeine intake needed to be as bland as possible, cascading over the laptop. My heart, a weary, overworked muscle, leaped into my throat. Who the hell knocks like that at 10 p.m. in this quiet, dead-end neighborhood? XXPD, we're here answering an emergency call from this residence. Please open the door. The voice, gruff and no-nonsense, sliced through the thin kitchen walls. My mind scrambled, cycling through a Rolodex of past horrors. An emergency call? From my address? I hadn't called anyone. I hadn't heard anything. My paranoia, usually a low thrum beneath my skin, ratcheted up a notch, vibrating through my bones. Had one of them finally tracked me down? Were they trying a new tactic? I wasn't a hero, never claimed to be, but my gut was already clenching into a hard knot of dread. This wasn't a blizzard-choked road where sanity frayed at the edges, nor a polite dinner party where the host was the main course. This was worse. This was home, or what passed for it this week. I pushed away from the counter, the cheap laminate scraping under my weight, and padded across the living room carpet. Every step a hesitant whisper. The porch light, a weak yellow glow against the encroaching darkness, spilled a thin rectangle of light onto the floor through the glass panels of the front door. I peered through the peephole, a blurry, distorted view of two figures, police, or at least men in uniforms. I unlatched the deadbolt, the click echoing unnaturally loud in the silence of the house, and pulled the door open a crack. The chill of the night air, carrying the faint, unsettling scent of wet earth and something else, something metallic, like old blood, slid past me. Good evening, officers. I'm sorry, but you've probably made a mistake. I didn't make an emergency call, I said, forcing a tight, awkward smile. My voice sounded thin, reedy, utterly unconvincing even to my own ears. The two officers on my porch, however, didn't react with the usual tired frustration I'd come to expect from law enforcement. No, they just stood there, unblinking, their expressions flat, too flat. One of them, a broad-shouldered man with a face that looked like it had been carved from granite, stepped forward. "Hello, ma'am," he said, his voice a low rumble. "I'm Officer Blythe, and this is my partner, Officer Duchamp." They even had name tags, stitched onto uniforms that looked less like standard issue, and more like they'd been dragged through a bramble bush and then left to dry in a dusty attic. Blythe's tag read Rainer Blythe, Duchamp's Greg Duchamp. Fine. My internal cynicism, usually a reliable shield, was already poking holes in their facade. They looked less like officers and more like they'd spent a week living in a dumpster behind a particularly aggressive kebab shop. Their skin had a strange ashen quality, almost like dried clay, and their eyes, too wide, too still. "We received a call from this address," Blythe continued, his gaze drifting past my shoulder, over my head, and settling on the dimly lit staircase leading to the second floor. The unlit hallway above seemed to absorb the meager light, becoming an inky black maw. The female caller claimed to hear the crawling sound of a large animal on the second floor while she was in the living room. "Do you live alone, ma'am? Is there another woman in your house?" My stomach dropped. A cold, hard plummet. A crawling sound. A female caller. This was already hitting too close to home, too close to the edge of the abyss I tried so hard to skirt. My own voice was sharper now, edged with a rising current of fear. "No, I live alone, and I am alone tonight. I really didn't hear anything abnormal, and I certainly didn't make or hear anyone make an emergency call. Are you sure you have the right address?" Blythe's eyes, devoid of any warmth or humor, finally met mine again. "Is your address XXXXXXX?" he asked, naming my street and number. "Yes, but..." I trailed off, the word a useless whisper. They had the right address. My discomfort, initially a mild unease, had now fully blossomed into a prickly, undeniable fear. My internal alarm bells, usually set to a polite, mild unease, had just upgraded to full-blown existential dread siren. "Well, ma'am, looks like we'll have to come in and have a check on things. You might have been entertaining some unwanted guests this whole evening." Blythe's tone was half joking, but his eyes held no mirth. He exchanged a glance with Duchamp, and it wasn't a silent chuckle, it was a silent understanding. Something chillingly predatory. I hated their casual flippancy, their almost gleeful air, but the wild, inky darkness behind them, stretching out beyond my porch lights, suddenly felt like a much greater threat. Maybe, I reasoned, having two armed men, even strange ones, Check the place out wouldn't be the worst idea. It was a desperate gamble, a concession to the fear that was now a cold current running through my veins. "Relax, ma'am," Duchamp finally spoke, his voice surprisingly soft, almost oily. He took a large, deliberate step forward, planting one heavy boot across my threshold, forcing me to step back, to yield the space. "We're pretty sure it'll turn out to be nothing. Maybe the caller herself offered the wrong address. We'll just take a quick look to confirm everything and move on." Blythe followed, moving with an unnerving smoothness for a man of his bulk. They didn't wait for an invitation. They simply entered, their presence immediately filling my small house, making the air feel thick and heavy, like something was pressing down on my chest. I flipped on every light switch I could find, desperate to banish the shadows, but the house still felt wrong, like a stage set for a play I desperately didn't want to be a part of. They moved quickly, efficiently, like they knew the layout of every house in the world. Straight for the second floor, their heavy boots thudding softly on the wooden stairs, a sound that resonated deep in my own bones. I stood at the bottom, watching their flashlights cut swathes through the darkness of the upper hallway, their beams probing under beds, behind curtains, even out the windows. They checked everywhere, their movements almost ritualistic, finding nothing, or at least claiming to find nothing. They descended. "All clearing, ma'am," Blythe announced, his voice flat. "Just like we thought. Probably a prank call or a wrong number. You can rest easy." They didn't linger, didn't offer any further platitudes, just turned, walked out my front door, and disappeared into the night. I watched their figures dissolve into the oppressive blackness beyond the porch light, a profound sense of disquiet settling over me. The chilling wind picked up, rustling the dry leaves in the yard, reminding me to pull my worn leather jacket tighter around myself. That's when the first real alarm bell rang, clanging loud and clear in the sudden silence. I hadn't seen a police car anywhere. No flashing lights, no idling engine, no distant rumble, nothing. They'd simply walked away into nothing. I stood there for a long moment, the porch light illuminating only empty air, the street silent and dark. My unease morphed into a cold, hard knot of dread. This wasn't just weird. This was deeply, fundamentally wrong. The alleged emergency call itself was creepy enough. A large animal crawling upstairs, a female caller who wasn't me. But the officers, they had no car. Their uniforms were disheveled, their faces gaunt, their eyes too wide and too still. They looked less like they'd been out patrolling and more like they'd been out surviving. Fugitives in blue. Was this some elaborate middle-aged prank? Some kind of weird initiation rite for new residents? Or worse, my mind, a cynical but stubbornly rational machine, struggled to compute. I stumbled back inside, the warmth of the house doing nothing to thaw the chill in my bones. I returned to my laptop, a desperate need for answers overriding my exhaustion. I had to know if these officers were real, if this whole bizarre encounter was some elaborate, twisted joke. Maybe I needed to call the real police. Half-mindedly, my fingers hovered over the keyboard, then typed the names Rainer Blythe, Greg Duchamp Police Department. I hit enter, my breath held tight in my chest. If this was a prank, a simple search would prove it. No digital roster, no local news mention, nothing. Except something did pop up on the very first entry. And it wasn't from a police website. It was from a blog, an obscure, dusty corner of the internet dedicated to occult phenomena, urban legends, and unsolved crimes. The title of the article, published 5 years ago, hit me like a physical blow. Where did Officer Rainer Blythe and Officer Greg Duchamp go after their last mission? Answering an emergency call regarding a malicious crawling figure on the second floor of a residence in a wooded area. Two things happened simultaneously. The knot in my stomach tightened into an agonizing coil, and I immediately began to read. My fingers, surprisingly steady, scrolled down, the words blurring, then sharpening into stark, chilling clarity. The article, written from the perspective of an amateur sleuth, detailed a case from 9 years prior. It described a female homeowner, a Lori Randall, 52, living alone at my exact address, who had called the police after hearing a large animal crawling upstairs, only to find blood trails on her staircase. Blythe and Duchamp had arrived, calmed her down, and gone inside, telling her to wait on the porch. They found the blood trail, described as human handprints rather than claw marks, leading halfway down the stairs, then turning back up toward the second-floor bathroom. The window in the bathroom was open, and the trail continued horizontally along the outside wall, as if something had crawled out and moved sideways. Bizarre, unexplainable. They went outside to investigate further, expecting to find Lori Randall on the porch, but she was gone, vanished. The article described the officers' growing alarm, their calls into the darkness, and then the cold, gooey droplets. Blood falling from above. They looked up at the porch ceiling, and then the article just stopped, abruptly. No conclusion, no resolution, just an ellipsis that spoke volumes about the fate of the officers. Anyone else would dismiss it as sensationalist garbage. Another flimsy urban legend, but not me. Not with the matching names, the matching address, the chillingly specific details of the emergency call. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the silence of the house. I was starting to believe that something had indeed been crawling in this house, that those two officers hadn't been pranksters, and that I was now caught in the echoes of a 9-year-old horror. It was late, deep into the small hours of the morning by the time I finished the article. My head swam with a nauseating cocktail of fear and exhaustion. I tried to rationalize nightmare, coincidence, overactive imagination, but the details were too precise. I forced myself to get ready for bed, promising myself I'd call the real police department in the morning, and maybe even my real estate agent. If this house had a history, I wanted out. Sleep came, grudgingly, but it was a fitful, shallow affair. It was barely an hour later when a frantic scream tore through the thin veil of slumber, yanking me violently back to consciousness. "Oh God, please send help. Oh my God, there is blood. So much blood on the stairs. I can't go back inside. Please send someone. Now!" It was a woman's voice, raw with terror. I was out of bed in a flash, bare feet slapping against the cool wood floor, a desperate surge of adrenaline coursing through me. I bolted to the window, fumbling with the latch, shoving the curtain aside. My porch light was still on, a defiant glow against the encroaching darkness. But from my vantage point, all I could see was the roof, the gnarled branches of the trees swaying like skeletal fingers in the wind. The woman's voice was lower now, closer, a panicked mumble. I strained to hear, but couldn't make out the exact words. Something about her address, I thought. And then, as quickly as it had begun, it stopped. The night fell silent once more, a heavy, suffocating blanket. What the hell? My adrenaline, having spiked so high, now receded, leaving me shaky and cold. Had I imagined it? Hallucinated the scream, conjured by the article, by my own growing fear? The exhaustion was a lead weight in my limbs. I needed to sleep. I needed to believe it was just a nightmare. I crawled back into bed, pulling the covers tight around me, but sleep was a fickle mistress. I drifted off again, only to wake with a jolt, not to a sound, but to an absolute, bone-deep wrongness. 1 minute, I was in a restless slumber. The next, I was wide awake, shivering in my pajamas, standing on my own porch. My heart seized. Did I sleepwalk? The thought was terrifying. Alien. I felt detached, like I was moving through a lucid dream, The front door was ajar, a sliver of inky blackness drawing me in. I pushed it open, stepping back into the house, but froze, every muscle locking rigid with a horror that transcended any dream. Standing in the doorway, framed by the pale rectangle of the porch light, was a woman, or what was left of one. Her eyes were glassy, dead, staring blankly ahead. Her skin was the color of ash. Her throat, it was gone, shredded, torn away, leaving a gaping, bloody chasm. The mutilation didn't stop there. It continued down her torso, a deep, sickening canal dug from her sternum to her groin, a grotesque furrow of exposed flesh and bone, flooding the surrounding areas with congealed blood. Red droplets, thick and glistening, dripped from her fingertips onto the pristine carpet. I stood there, paralyzed, unable to move, unable to breathe, my gaze fixed on the emotionless, violated face. The stillness was absolute, broken only by the frantic beat of my own heart in my ears. And then, the stillness shattered. The corpse stirred, a low, wet groan, a sound of unimaginable agony, escaped from the ruined throat. Trembling, shuddering, it slowly crouched, then leaned forward, collapsing into a grotesque parody of a crawling position. It ignored me, its glassy eyes fixed on something unseen. With a sickening crunch of joints, it rigidly turned on all fours and began to crawl, slowly, deliberately, deeper into the house. It moved towards the stairs, leaving an unholy trail of glistening, dark red blood, like a worming slug from hell leaving a track of crimson mucus. Up the stairs it went, into the black maw of the second-floor hallway, and then it was gone. The next thing I knew, I was waking up in my own bed, the morning sunlight spilling through the window, painting the room in a deceptively cheerful glow. My head throbbed, and my body felt like I'd been run over by a freight train. The nightmare, the woman, Lori Randall, the homeowner from the article. It had to be a dream, a vivid, terrifying nightmare, conjured from the depths of my own anxieties, inspired by the macabre story I'd read. The thought, however, brought no comfort, only a deeper sense of unease. What if it wasn't a dream? What if her tortured spirit had truly paid me a visit? What then? I showered, the hot water doing little to wash away the lingering cold of fear, then forced down some bland breakfast. My next move was clear: confirm the house's history. I called my real estate agency, my voice surprisingly steady as I inquired about the previous owners. The agent, cheerfully oblivious to my internal turmoil, informed me that the house was only 3 years old, a replacement built on the exact same location after the old one was torn down. The previous owners, a couple, had sold it happily after 2.5 years, inheriting a mansion elsewhere. Zero useful information. They claimed to know nothing about the previous house or its former owners, suggesting I contact the local police. Right, the police, the real police. I dialed the local precinct, my fingers tracing the outline of my wristwatch, a grounding habit. First, I asked about officers Blythe and Duchamp. The dispatcher, after a brief pause, confirmed their existence. Yes, they had indeed been part of the department many years ago, but when I pressed for details on their departure, a wall came up. Personnel matter was, sir. We cannot disclose that information. Sir, right. My transient jobs, my general lack of engagement with people, meant I often presented as gender neutral or just invisible. It was fine. I didn't correct her. Then I recounted the previous night's bizarre visit, the emergency call I hadn't made, the 2 officers who looked like they'd clawed their way out of a shallow grave. The dispatcher's tone shifted, became more serious. The call was non-existent, she confirmed. No record of an emergency call from my address, but the fact that I'd seen those 2 specific names, describing their exact appearance. She told me she'd send someone over to investigate my naughty report. Less than an hour later, 2 new officers arrived on my porch, looking far more official and far less undead. They showed me photos of Blythe and Duchamp. Yes, those were the men. My words came out clipped, precise, an automatic defense mechanism. They then confirmed what the blog had hinted at, revealing that Blythe and Duchamp had vanished 9 years ago while answering an emergency call from this very address. The caller? Lori Randall, then 52, reporting mysterious crawling sounds. When I asked about Lori, they exchanged a glance, a flicker of something unreadable in their eyes, before reluctantly adding that she too had gone missing that same night. They took my statement, left their contact information, and departed. I watched them drive off, a real police car this time, its engine humming reassuringly down the street. The severity of the situation finally, truly sank in. Blythe and Duchamp were real. Lori Randall was real. They hadn't been pranksters. They'd been something else. Something that could impersonate the missing. Something that could haunt this very ground. The police had covered it up. I realized, not out of malice, but perhaps out of a desperate attempt to contain panic, to protect the community from a truth too horrific to bear. My search for local news reports or police files on the disappearances came up empty. They had indeed been scrubbed. I tried to reach the blogger, sending an email to the address on the dusty, unupdated contact page. I held zero expectation of a reply. The day passed in a haze of mounting anxiety, the quiet ticking of my wristwatch loud in the silence. As night fell, my fear culminated, a cold, sharp blade twisting in my gut. I wasn't superstitious. Not truly. I was a survivor, a pragmatist. I told myself I would call the police immediately, at the slightest sign of anything amiss. At 8 p.m., all the lights in the house were blazing, every bulb fighting a losing battle against the encroaching darkness outside. I was huddled in my living room armchair, laptop open, scrolling aimlessly, pretending to be distracted. In reality, every nerve ending was tuned, acutely aware of every creak, every imagined thud, every whisper of the old house. 10 p.m. arrived, my usual shower and bedtime ritual. I stood, stretched, feigned a yawn, trying to convince myself I was just tired. But underneath the facade of normalcy, I was praying to a God I didn't believe in, praying that no crawling, gutted woman would visit me in my sleep. No grinning, dead policeman would come knocking. I shuffled towards the bottom of the stairs, my steps slowing, then stopping dead. The second-floor hallway, usually just a domestic space, now loomed over me like the cold, dark barrel of a gun. The hallway lights were off. I hadn't turned them off. I had deliberately flooded the house with light, a desperate plea for safety. Frozen, a thrumming premonition echoing in my head. I hesitated. Call the police. Some of my lights were mysteriously turned off. Please send help. Would that be a reasonable emergency call? But I had promised myself, at the slightest suspicion of danger, I would call 911. My vacillation was cut short, brutally. The menacing gun barrel of a hallway finally answered my doubt, emanating a sound I had come to associate with pure, unadulterated horror. The same wet, dragging, scraping noise the gutted woman had made in my nightmare. The sound of something large and heavy trying to maneuver on all fours. If the sound alone wasn't enough to send me spiraling into full-blown panic, the vivid, visceral images that immediately popped into my mind certainly did the trick. I clapped a hand over my mouth, stifling a scream, a raw, primal sound that wanted to tear itself from my throat. My body suddenly flooded with a new surge of adrenaline, darted for the front door, a desperate flight instinct overriding all reason. But then I remembered Lori Randall, the 2 officers, the porch, the vanishing act. If whatever was crawling upstairs was following the same script, the porch wasn't safety, it was a trap. My mind cornered, desperate, wasn't thinking straight. Instead of risking the outside, I retreated, scrambling back into the living room, dropping to my knees behind the sofa. Useless cover, A child's hide-and-seek game against a monster from hell. My fingers, trembling violently, fumbled for my phone, already dialing 911. Please, something big is crawling in my second-floor hallway. I need help. Now! My voice was a choked whisper, barely audible even to myself. The dispatcher, calm and professional, offered to stay on the line. I refused. I couldn't afford the distraction. I needed to hear, to discern, to know what was happening around me. As long as the police were coming, I would be fine. I had to be. A sudden, loud creak echoed from upstairs, probably the door at the far end of the hallway. The crawling sound paused, then continued, now accompanied by a subtle clatter. The thing was entering the bathroom. Good. It was moving away from me. But if the article was to be believed, that meant it was moving outside the house. Going out was suicide. Hunching my back, I scurried, silently, on hands and knees, into the kitchen, my breath ragged in my chest. I crawled under the large counter, feeling the grit of crumbs on the floor, the cold linoleum against my cheek. This felt like better cover, more substantial. On my way, I'd snatched a large kitchen knife, the cold steel a thin comfort in my shaking hand. What now? Do I wait here? Is it truly that unsafe to leave? To make a break for my car? Floor the gas? And just go? Beads of cold perspiration trickled down my spine, chilling me further. Indecision. Again. My fatal flaw. Then, a flurry of violent, authoritative knocks on the front door, followed by a gruff, familiar male voice, tore me from my dithering. Police! Open the door! Relief, so potent it was almost painful, flooded through me. Thank God, they were here. Hope surged, blindingly bright. I started to crawl out from under the counter, ready to spill my guts, to tell them everything. But then, the other voice, equally familiar, equally chilling, chimed in, cutting through my fragile hope like a rusty blade. We are Officer Blythe and Officer Duchamp. Ma'am, you already know us. Please open the door. And then, Duchamp again, his voice playful, gleeful, like a maniac at the end of a chainsaw. Or else we're gonna have to smash it. No, 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 no. My mind screamed, but no sound escaped my throat. I bit down on my thumb, so hard I tasted blood. A desperate attempt to stay silent, to keep the sobs from escaping. Warm tears, hot and desperate, welled in my eyes, blurring the dusty underside of the counter. They were here, the wrong police, the missing police, the dead ones. My stomach dropped, not just into my gut, but through the floorboards, down to hell, and kept going. Loud thuds hammered against the front door, each one louder than the last, shaking the very foundations of the house. They were ramming it, using their bodies as battering rams. A violent explosion of splintering wood, followed by the sickening thud of a human body hitting the ground. One of them giggled, a high-pitched, childish sound. And then I heard movement, the scrape of fabric, the creak of knees as one of them got up. Greg, can you hear that? I think Lori is still up there in the bathroom. Blythe's voice, now closer. Closer than it should be. Yeah, that dumbass bitch doesn't know how to open a window without smashing it. Duchamp, his voice dripping with amusement. More sniggers. Footsteps, heavy and deliberate, began to ascend the stairs. How about let's go help out? We'll sweep the first floor later. Your call, boss. They were going upstairs. They had left me alone on the first floor, and the front door was shattered. It was now or never. I wouldn't make a sound. No creaking door. This was my chance. My body moved on instinct, a desperate animalistic urge for survival. I tiptoed to the ruined doorway, a sliver of cautious hope blooming in my chest. And then I sprinted. Out the door, across the porch, and towards my car, parked innocently in the driveway. Freedom, safety, Buster. But as I reached the driver's side door, my hand closing around the cold metal, my heart plummeted again. My keys, they were on my nightstand, in my bedroom, upstairs. The stupid habit, the eternal curse of my own meticulous disorganization. Going back was suicide. Time was of the essence. My mind, usually a whirlwind of anxious thought, became startlingly clear. I couldn't afford to freeze. I couldn't afford to die here. Like Lori, like the last victim of this house. I veered sharply, away from the car, away from the house, and plunged into the darkened patch of woods behind my property. This was it, my only way out. This particular stretch of woods was a shortcut, a rough path to a gas station not too far away, a beacon of light and other people. 10 minutes, I told myself. 10 minutes, and I'd be safe. I'd be among humans again. I had my cell phone, its weak flashlight beam cutting a shaky cone through the oppressive darkness, but the woods swallowed me whole. There was no path, just untrodden wilderness. A thick tangle of branches and roots that grabbed at my clothes, clawed at my face. I stumbled, scraped, every few steps turning back, paranoid, straining to hear any sound of pursuit, any glimpse of their ashen faces through the trees. I'd gotten away too easily, far too easily. Was I just too scared to feel safe? Or was this a new kind of trap? The 10-minute walk stretched into an eternity, a decade-long march through a dark, suffocating tunnel, insulated from any hope, any warmth. My lungs burned, my legs ached, my throat raw from suppressed screams. Then, finally, a glimmer, the faint, distant glow of the gas station lights, a beacon of human civilization cutting through the gloom. My instincts screamed at me, urged me to unleash a primal yell, to send my voice traveling at the speed of sound towards that haven, to get at least a vicarious taste of security. It was then that the first cold, gooey droplet landed on the tip of my nose. It smelled like decaying blood. More drops followed, landing on my forehead, my cheek, clinging to my eyelashes. Before my conscious mind could process what was happening, my gaze, drawn by an ancient, terrible instinct, lifted towards the dense canopy of trees above. That's the last thing I remember from yesterday. The last moment of being Leo Vance, the weary wanderer, the haunted everyman. Now, I lie here, not feeling pain, but a profound emptiness where pain should be. My throat, my rib cage, my stomach, they are torn open, not bleeding, but rearranged. And this hunger, this gnawing, burning, endless hunger, it is a presence, a yearning animal inside me, growing stronger by the second. And not far away, I can feel the vibrant life energy of those teenagers, delicate yet potent, threading through the shrubs and thickets like a school of fish, a lure, a promise. The time on my phone, its screen cracked and dim, says it is dusk. The light is fading fast. I have to put this down now. I have to go satiate this hunger, this primal, ancient need. I wish I could keep updating you, tell you about this new one life, this terrible, insatiable transformation. But I'm afraid that very soon, the animal will take over completely, leaving behind only a tiny, flickering fragment of my human intelligence. Probably right after this first hunt. I wonder who will become the next owner of my house, and if the gang, you know who I mean, will eventually come looking for me. Character count 9873. The stale scent of cheap pizza grease clung to the diner air, a heavy shroud draped over the worn vinyl booths and the muted drone of the late-night news. I stared at the congealed slice on the chipped plate before me, not hungry, just tracing the crust with a finger. It was the smell, I think, that always did it. That, and the way the shadows played tricks on the edges of my vision, making me see faces that weren't there, faces I had put there, scarred, twisted, haunted. The image of the girl, her face a patchwork of ruined skin, flickered behind my eyes, as vivid as the day I'd ordered her life to be burned away. It always started with a game, with a girl named Gwen, and a life I swore I'd escaped. My hand went to the cool, familiar metal of my old analog wristwatch, a nervous tick I'd picked up somewhere along the desolate stretches of highway that defined my existence. 3:42 a.m. Time meant nothing anymore. Just another meaningless metric in a world that consistently defied logic. This wasn't the first time the ghosts of my own past had ambushed me in the quiet lull of a forgotten diner, and I knew with the grim certainty of a man who'd seen too much that it wouldn't be the last. This particular specter, however, was homegrown. It wasn't some disembodied wail from a lonely stretch of road or the guttural snarl of a beast that shouldn't be. This was me, a younger, crueler me, steeped in the privilege and poison of a family I'd tried desperately to outrun. It began, as most of my self-inflicted wounds did, with a misplaced sense of curiosity and an insidious, inherited power I'd been told was a curse, but often felt more like a gilded cage. Her name was Gwen. We'd been in middle school together, but it wasn't until freshman year of high school that she registered beyond a fleeting glance. She was beautiful, I suppose, in that effortlessly vibrant way teenagers are before the world grinds them down. Long, dark hair that caught the light, fair skin, and an athletic body that moved with an almost predatory grace on the tennis court. I'd signed up for tennis in gym that semester, less for sport and more for the quiet anonymity of the backcourts. I watched her play, a flicker of something akin to admiration stirring in me, a sensation I rarely allowed. Her competitive spirit was undeniable, sharp and focused, yet she couldn't beat me. Not her, not the handful of actual prodigies who'd come through those classes, not even the phantom echoes of professional legends that my family's staff liked to conjure to amuse themselves. It wasn't because I was a prodigy myself. It was because I was a Vance. And the Vances, for generations, had lived under a curse, a familial affliction that twisted reality to our whims, ensuring the world never went against us. We didn't win. We willed victory into existence. We didn't achieve. We mandated achievement. It was a subtle, insidious thing, rarely noticeable to outsiders. People simply forgot things they shouldn't have. Opportunities mysteriously opened. Opponents fumbled at crucial moments. It was a quiet, relentless tyranny, enforced by beings I'd once called butlers and staff, but had long since come to recognize as something far, far older and more horrifying. I was Zach back then, an idiot kid, insulated by generational evil, utterly oblivious to the true cost of my power. I wondered, even then, if Gwen would have cared about me at all had I not manipulated her. The thought should have been repellent. It should have been a screaming siren in my head. Instead, it was a quiet hum, a nagging curiosity, quickly drowned out by the mundane noise of my privileged life. Despite her raw talent, Gwen struggled against other competitive players in the actual circuits. There was plenty else going on in my life, a labyrinth of lessons from my family, learning the nuances of bending the world to my will. I wasn't ready to turn my full attention to her. I was still young, learning the true depths of how fundamentally different my family was from everyone else. I could be popular when I wanted to be, a charismatic center of attention. But if I grew bored, people would simply drift away, their memories of me fading into a comfortable blur. Though I called it a curse, this power, this ability to reshape reality, had infinite advantages. Or so I believed at the time. What a naive, self-absorbed fool I was. It was never an advantage. It was a chain, forged from desires and guilt. Gwen quit playing tennis over the summer before our sophomore year. I heard about it from a few lockers down, catching snippets of a conversation she was having with friends. Her voice was too light, too casual, trying to downplay the crushing weight of a dream abandoned. But I heard the tremor beneath it, the quiet despair. She'd given up, settled for less. My chest felt a strange, hollow ache. Even then, before the worst of the horrors, I felt the phantom limb of my reluctant conscience twitch. It was her life. I was reluctant to play around with it, to impose my will on something so personal. I decided to try and forget about Gwen for most of that year. I didn't have to study to get perfect grades. The answers simply coalesced in my mind, or the teacher's expectations somehow lowered to meet my minimal effort. But I decided to put in some effort anyway, just to feel a fleeting sense of normalcy. I hardly had to move to win at sports and gym, yet I tried to at least make myself look like I was trying. I told myself my powers had countless advantages, but life without a challenge could be quite dull. A dullness I would later learn to crave. A quiet emptiness infinitely preferable to the suffocating weight of my family's gifts. My thoughts returned to Gwen near the end of the school year. There was a regional pizza chain in my area, owned by her parents. It was above average, decent price. Money was never an issue for me. The chefs in our mansion could make a far better pizza. Anyway, but I'd stopped in one day with a couple of friends, still trying to live a somewhat normal life, to inhabit the skin of an ordinary teenager. That's when I saw her, sweeping the floor, her movements listless, her face devoid of the fiery spirit I remembered from the courts. She could be so much more, and I had chosen not to intervene, to stay out of her life, to let her give up on her dreams. Was that truly for the best? Was my non-interference a kindness, or a dereliction of a different kind of duty? My mind, already warped by the insidious influence of the Vances, began to rationalize. I could help her. I could give her back her dream. It wasn't manipulation, I told myself. It was assistance. A twisted form of philanthropy. God, I was so sick. A week later, I informed my parents of my decision to court Gwen. They were content. Contentment was the highest emotion they ever displayed, a bland approval that masked a universe of cold, calculated power. It was then that I made my move. Our butler, Chase, tall and impossibly blonde, with eyes that seemed to hold the cold, ancient wisdom of dead stars, placed an order for several pizzas. He also put in a special request for Gwen, specifically to deliver them. A little over half an hour later, she arrived. The mansion gates, usually impregnable, swung open to admit her beat-up car, and I met her at the driveway, feigning ignorance. "Hey, you're Gwen from school, right?" I watched the blush creep up her neck, a delicate flush against her pale skin. She liked me, or rather, the curse had already begun its subtle work, preparing her, predisposing her. Even then, the genuine nature of her reaction remained a haunting uncertainty. She came from a wealthy family too, but the chasm between their wealth and ours was a void measured in zeros, a gulf that spoke of power beyond mere currency. I handed her a roll of cash, $1,500. I took a perverse joy in handing out sizable tips, a trivial demonstration of effortless abundance. She stared at it, surprise warring with confusion. I'd made the situation awkward, a small, human misstep in my grand, inhuman scheme. "I just wanted to give you an idea of what it's going to be like when you're winning international tournaments," I told her, forcing a smile that felt alien on my face. She blushed again, a deeper crimson this time. I wanted her to know her dreams could still come true, that the universe, or at least my universe, would bend to accommodate them. In that moment, she seemed ready to try again. "Wait, how did you know I used to play tennis?" The question was a pinprick of doubt, a tiny crack in the perfectly constructed facade. I downplayed my answer, not wanting to come across as a stalker, though that's precisely what I was. I could have been blunt, lascivious, twisted the conversation into whatever depraved direction I wished. But even I knew, instinctively, that some semblance of self-restraint was necessary for the illusion to hold. Gwen was modest, genuinely believing she simply wasn't good enough to be a professional tennis player. From what I knew, she was right, but that was before the curse got involved. "I certainly hope you haven't quit for good," I told her, watching her face for any flicker of true resolve. "I have a feeling if you try again, you'll be able to ascend that plateau." After that day, Gwen quit delivering pizzas. She picked up her tennis racket again. I wanted her to feel like her hard work was responsible for her newfound success, but in reality, it wasn't necessary. The curse would take care of it. She practiced during the summer, relearning skills she'd lost, her movements growing sharper, her serves more powerful. She never noticed me watching her from the periphery of the park, nor did she notice Chase, my impossibly tall, unnervingly still butler, who often stood next to me, a silent, watchful shadow. "She's certainly a feisty young lady," Chase remarked one afternoon, his voice a low, sibilant hum that seemed to vibrate in the very air around us. He rubbed his gloved hands together, a gesture that always filled me with a primal unease. His gloves were never truly white, not in the way linen was white, but with a faint, almost imperceptible grayish cast, like old bone dust. "We're gonna make her a world champion, right?" I asked, a thrill of juvenile excitement mixing with a deeper, unsettling satisfaction. "She'll be the very best," Chase grinned, a flash of two white teeth in his pale face. His smile never quite reached his eyes. Chase, like the rest of my family's staff, wasn't exactly human. That truth had settled deep in my bones over the years, a cold, unshakable dread. They were servants, yes, but they were also the source, the conduits, the very reason my family wielded so much power. They were the ones who truly manipulated reality, who ensured the curse never failed. Gwen didn't realize it then, couldn't possibly have conceived it, but she was destined to be the greatest tennis player that ever lived. A puppet, dancing to the tune of my careless wishes, and it wouldn't be without consequences. Not for her, not for others, and certainly not for me. As soon as our junior year of high school started, Gwen tried out for the girls' tennis team. I watched her play, and as usual, no one noticed me. My presence faded into the background, a silent observer. She was brilliant, a whirlwind of effortless grace and power. My attraction to her, a shallow, manufactured thing, grew several times over. She looked so much happier now than the day I'd seen her sweeping that sterile floor. As predicted, she easily made the team, one step closer to achieving a dream that was no longer entirely her own. The hollow ache in my chest intensified, replaced by a dull, persistent throbbing. Eventually, I finally made my move. It was a Thursday. She had no class during sixth period. I had global history, a class I hated. So I skipped. I found her near the tennis courts, cooling down, sweat glistening on her skin. I congratulated her on her recent success. Over that year, she'd been moving up the ranks, a relentless ascent that defied natural progression. The curse was working overtime. I finally asked her out on a date, and that was the start of our romantic relationship. Or rather, the start of my most elaborate and self-destructive deception. As nice as it was, it caused me to indulge in my darker side. The side Chase and the others actively encouraged. One day after school, she was doing doubles practice with the high school girls team. Single-handedly, she was playing a perfect match, her every move flawless, her every shot a winner. Her partner, a lanky girl named Sarah, grew visibly frustrated, her face tightening with each unreturned volley. Sarah couldn't even get a hit in, Gwen taking every spotlight, dominating the court. I didn't see a problem with it then. My girl was winning. That was all that mattered. Sarah eventually dropped her racket, folded her arms, and refused to play. She and Gwen ended up in a small, heated argument, Sarah's frustration boiling over into sharp, angry words. My blood ran cold, my jaw clenched. No one spoke to my Gwen that way. I realized now her frustration was entirely understandable, a perfectly legitimate grievance. But at the time, like watching someone talk that way to my girlfriend, a girl I had, in my twisted way, made was infuriating. How should we punish this foolish girl? Chase appeared right next to me, his voice a silky whisper. I hadn't heard him approach. I never did. He rubbed his impossibly clean gloved hands together, a sound like dry leaves skittering across pavement. I don't want her on the team anymore, I muttered, my voice tight with cold fury. Don't kill her or anything. Just, make her quit. Might I suggest paralysis? His voice was utterly devoid of empathy, a flat, eager suggestion. He seemed quite enthusiastic at the thought, a predatory glint in his ancient eyes. That could work, I said, a chilling nonchalance in my tone. I barely registered the monstrousness of my own words. Chase gave a soft, almost imperceptible whistle. It was less a sound and more a sudden shift in the air, a drop in temperature, a prickle on my skin. Sarah, still fuming, suddenly clutched her leg. Her face expressed a swift, sharp pain, morphing into a mask of pure discomfort. The way she tried to move her legs, the way her knees buckled, indicated something was profoundly wrong. She crumpled to the ground, a strangled gasp escaping her lips. That's what you get, I said quietly, a low, venomous satisfaction coiling in my gut. I'm haunted by those ruthless words from that day, by the chilling indifference in my own voice. It could have been worse, though, much worse. After Sarah was eventually helped off the court, moaning in pain, Chase informed me of the precise nature of her affliction. He'd given her a rapidly progressing case of ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease, a slow, agonizing paralysis leading to death. When I asked him to explain the disease in further detail, the full, horrifying implications of what I had ordered slammed into me. I told you not to kill her, I hissed, my voice cracking with sudden, belated fear. Even if it's slow, I think that goes a bit far. My conscience, a shriveled, atrophied thing, finally reared its head, gagging on the horror. Luckily, Chase, in his own twisted interpretation of following orders, changed the prognosis. He'd given her Guillain-Barré syndrome instead. It was still awful, a terrible, punitive punishment for what I realized now was a legitimate grievance. Sarah missed the rest of the school year because of it, her muscles wasting, her body unresponsive. But by next year, she made a full recovery, a miracle, everyone called it, a miracle I had, in my arrogance, both taken and given. The memory of her twisted, pain-racked face clung to me, a persistent stain. That was just the first of several instances of me harming people who played with or against Gwen. She was going to be the best, and I was going to make sure it happened, crushing anyone who stood in her way, or even simply annoyed me. At this point, she was playing the best games of her life, her ascent meteoric. I became complacent for a bit, feeling secure in her manufactured triumph. One day, I decided not to attend one of her games. I had other pursuits. Later, Chase informed me that without my presence, without the direct application of my curse, she was losing. She was faltering, the thin illusion of her talent beginning to fray. I hurried to go see her, the old fear of exposure, of failure, prickling at me. I arrived just in time. The air in the stadium shifted as I stepped through the doors, a subtle hum of unnatural energy filling the space. Gwen's opponent, a formidable, stubborn young woman with a habit of ignoring pain, was serving for match point. As I settled into my seat, a sudden, inexplicable tremor ran through her arm. She double faulted while serving. Gwen, seizing the moment, made a massive comeback, winning the game, the set, and the match. Unbeknownst to her, or to anyone else, when I'd arrived, her opponent sustained a wrist injury that went undetected until after the game. A small fracture, the kind that healed badly, leaving a persistent ache, just enough to derail a burgeoning career. The memory of that girl's stoic face, betraying no pain even as her future crumbled, was another scar I carried. There were other such instances. Times I allowed Gwen to play without giving her advantages, testing the limits of her natural talent. Occasionally, she didn't need me. She was good, truly good, on her own. But most of the time, the curse would hum within me, an irresistible pull, and I would give in, causing her opponents to fumble, their rackets to swing the wrong way, their serves to clip the net. Each time, a piece of me withered. I was at my worst the day one of Gwen's opponents deliberately tried to hurt her. Gwen was winning by a comfortable margin, so her opponent, a tall, stringy girl with a malicious gleam in her eyes, retaliated. She served the ball in such a way as to aim for Gwen's face, a deliberate, vicious act. Twice in a row, Gwen had to put the racket up just to defend herself, the ball slamming into the strings, rattling her teeth. Why didn't the referee do anything? He stood there, impassive, as if nothing untoward was happening. My fury spiked, hot and black. This was my domain. This was my Gwen. I took matters into my own hands, exerting my will, slowing the ball, causing it to swerve harmlessly at the last second. Shortly thereafter, Gwen won, the opponent's serve mysteriously failing. I was livid about that woman's behavior. She wanted to leave bruises on Gwen's face, to scar her. So I took action. Once the match ended, I ordered Chase to ruin the young woman's face, to make her pay. I remember the words, cold and detached, as if I was ordering a meal. Make her unrecognizable. He did so, with the efficient, terrifying precision that was his hallmark. She became the victim of a house fire the next day. She lived a cruel mercy, but had numerous scars and a completely unrecognizable face. Her dreams, her life, irrevocably shattered. That was the turning point. That was the face that truly haunted me, that finally punched through the thick layers of my inherited delusion. The smell of burning hair, of melted plastic, of ruined flesh, was a perfume I'd never quite scrubbed from my memory. Even now, years later, sipping lukewarm coffee in a nameless diner, the phantom scent clung to my worn leather jacket, to my very soul. After realizing what I had done, the monstrous, casual cruelty I had inflicted, I stopped requesting retaliation. I was reluctant to have Gwen's opponents injured in any sort of way. Instead, I simply had Chase make them stumble or swing their rackets the wrong way, enough to ensure Gwen's victory without inflicting permanent damage. It was a small, pathetic gesture of repentance, but it was a start, a crack in the facade of my privileged indifference. In the end, it paid off. Gwen could finally play at the national level. She was a rising star, a phenomenon. The crowd cheered her name. The commentators waxed poetic about her natural talent. But I didn't feel comfortable with what I had done. The taste of victory was ash in my mouth. Also, my relationship with Gwen was becoming more intimate. We were inseparable, the high school power couple. Always together, always smiling. Yet, it was starting to feel fake, an elaborate play, scripted by an unseen hand. Does she really love me? I was in a position where I could marry any woman I wanted, live happily with them at will, manipulate their affections into something indistinguishable from genuine love. As nice as it sounded, the thought was a lead weight in my stomach. I kept wondering how things would have played out had I been more of a normal person, had I not been cursed with this parasitic power. I put that to the test one day. It was a warm afternoon. I decided to walk Gwen home. We stopped in a gazebo in a nearby park, bathed in the dappled sunlight filtering through the leaves. We kissed, the air thick with the manufactured intimacy of my making. I told myself I loved her. She was amazing, everything I'd wanted, but I needed to know if it was real. I had to know. My reluctant conscience, growing stronger with each casual atrocity I'd committed, demanded it. There's a way to get people to stop being under my control so easily, a simple, devastating truth. I stopped our kissing session, pulling back slightly, staring deep into Gwen's beautiful blue eyes. They were wide, confused, mirroring the sudden tension in my own chest. "What's wrong?" she whispered, her brow furrowed. "This doesn't feel right," I told her, the words tasting like rust and regret. "Am I a bad kisser?" A flicker of insecurity, so human, so real, passed over her face. I shook my head slowly, then spoke my last name, my real last name, the name almost no one outside of my family and their grotesque servants knew. Vance. My fears, my deepest, most agonizing fears, came true as her expression changed. The confusion in her eyes deepened, then transformed into a blank incomprehension, as if a switch had been flipped, a curtain drawn across her mind. She frowned, a genuine, unmanipulated frown. "How do you feel now?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper, uneasy dread coiling in my gut. She shook her head, her gaze distant, unfocused. "You're right. Something feels off, but I don't know why." The connection, the manufactured bond, had snapped. The spell was broken, and I felt, for the first time in years, utterly, terrifyingly alone. From there, we grew apart. We still dated, still spent a lot of time together in and out of school, a lingering echo of what we had been, but the passion was gone. The manufactured spark extinguished. She tried to act like she was still interested, her smiles brittle, her laughter forced. But it seemed now that she was just trying not to let me down. I'd been so supportive of her now national tennis career. She felt obligated to stay with me because of it. A duty, not love. It was a lie, a crushing, suffocating lie. And so, I broke it off. It was a quiet breakup, devoid of drama, of tears. She acknowledged it, her eyes devoid of expression, and walked away as though it meant nothing to her. The emptiness of her reaction was a sharper pain than any angry outburst could have been. It hurt like hell, a searing, hollow ache in my chest. But I accepted my decision. I had freed her from my spell, from my family's insidious influence. And in doing so, I had taken the first terrifying step towards freeing myself. A few years later, I'd almost forgotten about Gwen. The memory had been buried deep, a painful, festering wound I refused to acknowledge. Since distancing myself from her, I'd also begun distancing myself from my family, from their mansion, from their insidious power. I hated having this ability to manipulate the world around me so easily. It was a cancer, a creeping rot that corrupted everything it touched. I'd hurt people for my own selfish desires, ruined lives, inflicted unimaginable suffering. In my family, and such actions were considered normal, the natural order of things, the prerogative of their cursed bloodline. But I didn't want to be like them. Not anymore. The burn victim, the paralytic, the countless others whose lives I had touched and twisted. They haunted me, waking me in cold sweats in anonymous motel rooms. I checked my watch then, a nervous habit that still clung to me. The phantom hitchhiker, the impossible stillness of that mountain pass, the whispers that weren't whispers, all of it felt like an extension of this same sickness, a universe determined to unravel around me. It was like that night at the motel, the one with the man in the walls, the imposter Mitch, where reality bent and broke in unseen ways, things shifting beyond my perception. The sheer, overwhelming wrongness of it all, in spite of my attempts to escape, to sever the ties. I finally returned to my family's nefarious luxury when I succeeded my late great-grandfather. The curse called me back, an irresistible gravitational pull. The vast, empty mansion felt less like a home and more like a mausoleum. I found out recently that Gwen's career was going poorly. She'd plateaued, her spark dimmed, her early promise unfulfilled. And then the offer, the insidious temptation. I'd been offered the opportunity to come to her rescue again. If I wanted to, she could still become an international champion. If I wanted her, she could still become my wife. I could undo my confession to her in that gazebo, rewind time, rewrite history. I'd started checking in on her again. My new butler, Sam, seeing to the surveillance. Whether she was out running errands or relaxing at home, I had the opportunity to spy on her, to watch her, to reel her back into my orbit. The more I thought about her, the more I wanted her back in my life. The loneliness of the road, the constant vigilance, the gnawing dread that the universe was just a farm for cosmic horrors. As I'd learned during that terrifying near-death experience, it was all starting to wear me down. Buster, my scruffy companion, nudged my hand, his soft muzzle reminding me of the one true, untainted thing in my life. I scratched behind his ears, my gaze drifting to the street outside the diner. My new butler, Sam, a younger, slicker version of Chase, seemed quite fond of bringing Gwen back into my life. He'd left folders of her recent photos, articles about her declining career, subtle hints about how easy it would be to restore her. He was a constant, insidious whisper in my ear, playing on my loneliness, on the lingering ghost of a past attachment. I want to see Gwen again, a part of me, the old, selfish Leo, whispered. I want to help her become the tennis legend she deserves to be. I want to reunite her with her high school sweetheart, Zach. No, God, no. The thought curdled in my stomach, the phantom smell of scorched flesh, of a ruined face, flared in my mind. The memory of Sarah's legs collapsing, the silent, agonizing paralysis. I felt a cold sweat break out on my skin. This wasn't about love or desire. This was the curse calling, the family's insidious nature trying to reassert its hold. It was the monster in me trying to claw its way back out. I slammed my hand on the table, the chipped plate rattling. Buster let out a startled yelp. I was not Zach anymore. I was Leo Vance, and I would rather die on the road, hunted by every horror this world could throw at me, than ever inflict that kind of pain, that kind of control on another living soul, especially not on her. I looked down at Buster, who was looking up at me with wide, worried eyes. Come on, boy, I muttered, pushing the plate away, the taste of cheap pizza suddenly like ash. Time to go. Character count, 9784. Saya tau you adeket sana. The words, delivered in a voice far too cheerful for the hour, echoed in the humid air of my apartment, cold despite the tropical night. Then the banging began. It wasn't a knock anymore. It was a percussive assault, a relentless, bone-jarring thudding against the flimsy barrier of my door. Each impact a hammer blow against my sanity. I was huddled in the farthest corner of the living room, knees drawn to my chest, staring at the scarred, cheap wood of the door, convinced my life was about to end. The old leather jacket, usually a comforting weight, felt like a shroud. I glanced down at my analog wristwatch, more out of habit than a need for the time. The hands were a blur. It was 2:55 a.m., and the monster outside was still calling for me. To understand how I ended up cornered like a rat, listening to a dead man's cheerful hammering and his chilling pronouncements, you have to go back 3 nights to the first knock on my door, a knock that started this whole damn nightmare. The world outside had gone quiet, swallowed by the enforced stillness of a protracted lockdown. 2 weeks, they said, then 3, stretching into an indefinite, suffocating period where the very air felt heavy with isolation. For most, it was an alien landscape of cabin fever and forced intimacy. For me, Leo Vance, it was just another Tuesday, or Wednesday, or whatever day it was. Days bled into nights, and nights into a familiar, almost comfortable solitude. My schedule had inverted itself years ago, a necessity born from the transient, often late-night jobs I picked up, truck stops, warehouse graveyard shifts, empty security booths in forgotten industrial parks. Being up when the world slept suited me. It was peaceful, the air cooler, the cacophony of humanity muted. It was also safer, less eyes, less questions, less chance for the past to catch up, or for the future to decide I was its next meal. This particular budget apartment, rented anonymously through a sketchy online portal, was perfect. Small, utilitarian, with windows overlooking a silent, dusty street. I'd set up my makeshift command center, a battered laptop, a stack of dog-eared paperbacks, and a perpetually brewing pot of lukewarm coffee. My worn leather jacket hung on the back of a rickety chair, an old friend ready for a quick escape. The go bag, packed with essentials, cash, a mag light, a first aid kit, a change of clothes, sat by the door, a silent testament to my perpetual readiness to disappear. Not that it would do me much good against this. This wasn't something you outran with a full tank of gas and a fresh set of tires. It was precisely 3 a.m. on that first night when the knocking started. 3 sharp, insistent raps. My blood ran cold, a familiar metallic taste coating my tongue. My nocturnal existence, while peaceful, had also conditioned me to a heightened state of paranoia. Knocks at this hour meant trouble. Always. I froze, my hand instinctively going to the heavy mag light I kept under my pillow. My breath hitched. I listened, my ears straining against the almost absolute silence of the building. Nothing. Maybe I'd imagined it, or maybe it was just a neighbor, confused, unlikely. Most residents here kept to themselves, ghosts in their own little boxes. Then 2 more knocks, louder this time, accompanied by a faint, muffled voice. Not a shout, more like a murmur, just beyond the thin wood of my door. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. My mind raced through scenarios: drunk neighbor, a genuine emergency, something worse. My hand, despite the tremor, found the doorknob. My fingers traced the cold metal, hesitating. Every instinct screamed at me to stay put, to pretend I wasn't home, to let whatever it was pass. But a deeper, more annoying part of me, the reluctant conscience, that fatal flaw I cursed daily, wouldn't let me. What if it was someone in real trouble? What if it was a child? I knew, intellectually, that this place, this building, was hardly a beacon of safety, but the thought still twisted in my gut. I took a deep, shaky breath, pulled the medical mask I kept handy over my face, a bizarre, modern ritual of self-preservation, and slowly, meticulously, slid the deadbolt. The click echoed in the silence. I twisted the knob, pulling the door inward just a crack, barely enough to peer through the sliver of darkness. Standing there, in the dim, shared hallway light, was a figure in a cheap polo shirt and a baseball cap. He held a large, flat cardboard box. Pizza. My shoulders slumped, the immediate crushing terror replaced by a wave of annoyance so profound it almost made me laugh. Pizza at 3 a.m. Right. Wrong house, bro, I muttered, already pushing the door shut, ready to retreat back into the blessed anonymity of my apartment. This was just a mistake, a mundane, annoying mistake, my kind of mistake, but the guy's foot was suddenly in the way, blocking the door. Please, boss, please. His voice was soft, insistent, almost pleading. It raised the hair on the back of my neck. Normal delivery guys didn't beg. I pulled the door back open, a sigh escaping my mask. Look, man, I didn't order anything. You've got the wrong address. He was pushing the pizza box towards me, his arm extended. It was a strange, almost forceful motion, like he was trying to offload something radioactive. Please, Juan, sir. Take it. Take it. Your order. His eyes, in the poor light, were wide, almost unblinking. There was something off about them, a vacant quality that unsettled me. Was he high or just really, really tired? I tried again, shaking my head firmly. No, I'm serious. I didn't order. You're definitely at the wrong house. But he didn't seem to be listening. He just kept repeating, please, boss, take it. Your order. Pushing the box closer and closer until it pressed against my chest, A flicker of something resembling pity, something I usually suppressed, pricked at me. Maybe he was developmentally disabled, or a non-native speaker struggling with the language. The lockdown had hit everyone hard. Deliveries at this hour were usually reserved for essentials, not greasy comfort food. Was he desperate for a completed delivery? For the payment? This was Malaysia, after all, where economic disparity was a constant shadow. My fatal flaw, the reluctant conscience, twitched. Better to just take the damn box, get rid of him, and figure it out later. I could check the address on the box, call the company. Simple. Reluctantly, I took the box. It was surprisingly light, almost flimsy. The first thing I noticed was the logo. Not the familiar red and white of Pizza Hut or the stylized Domino's emblem, just three stark, block letters, Gab. I'd never heard of it. Not a local chain, not a roadside stall, nothing I recognized from my extensive, albeit morbid, research into local oddities. There was no delivery sticker, no slip of paper, no address, no nothing. Just the Gab logo and the faint smell of something cheesy and slightly artificial. "Receipt?" I asked, holding the box away from me. My brow furrowed in suspicion. "Do you have a receipt with an address?" He shook his head, already backing away, his movements oddly jerky. No receipt." He was practically scurrying down the hall, like a rat bolting from a trap. I tried to call out to him, to hand him back the mysterious pizza, but he was gone, a phantom disappearing into the dimness. I was left standing there, at 3:03 a.m., holding a box of free, utterly unsolicited, and deeply unsettling pizza. Any sane person would be stoked, right? Free food, but it was 3 a.m., from an unknown place, delivered by a man who looked like he'd just seen a ghost, or was one himself. My sister, bless her pragmatic, superstitious heart, had always drilled one rule into me. Never pick up strange things from outside. Easiest way to avoid bringing in any bad luck or trouble. She'd been right about a lot of things. Mostly, I considered leaving it inside, but the thought made my skin crawl. It felt wrong, like a trap. So I did what I thought was the next best thing. I placed the box carefully outside my door, leaning it against the frame, resolving to toss it with the morning trash. Let the building's sanitation staff deal with whatever bizarre ritual this was. Back inside, the apartment felt colder than before. The previous quiet had been peaceful. Now it felt oppressive, as if the silence itself was a pressure building behind my ears. I tried to get back to my computer, to lose myself in the glowing screen, but the image of the delivery guy's vacant eyes, the strange urgency in his voice, kept replaying in my mind. Eventually, the first pale streaks of dawn crept through the blinds, painting the room in a sickly gray light. I felt absolutely drained. I dragged myself out, my old analog wristwatch showing a little past 6 a.m., and gathered my trash bag. As I opened the door, my eyes immediately darted to the spot where I'd left the pizza box. It was gone, not just moved, but utterly vanished. No traces, no stains on the floor, nothing. I frowned. Maybe the janitor had come early, or a hungry stray cat, or someone had just picked it up. It was strange, certainly, but in the grand tapestry of weirdness I'd experienced in my life, a disappearing pizza box barely registered. I shrugged, tossed my trash, and tried to forget about the whole thing. For a few blessed hours, I almost succeeded. Then the knocking came again. My eyes snapped open. I was in that twilight state between sleep and waking, a desperate, futile attempt to snatch a few hours of oblivion. The sound cut through the hazy silence of my bedroom like a cleaver. Two sharp, distinct raps, not polite, not hesitant, deliberate. My heart leaped into my throat. I fumbled for my wristwatch. 2:45 a.m. Too early for most things, too late for everything else. My stomach twisted itself into a knot. This wasn't a mistake. This was a pattern. And patterns in my life usually meant escalating horror. I forced myself out of bed, every muscle protesting. The air felt thick, heavy with unspoken dread. My eyes darted around the dimly lit room, searching for something, anything, to make sense of this. Nothing. Just the familiar, mundane clutter of my transient life. I put on my mask, a useless scrap of cloth against whatever this was, and crept toward the door. My hand trembled as I reached for the peephole. A different guy. Same cheap polo shirt, same cap, though this one was faded, and the same damn box of pizza, held out like an offering to an unseen god. His eyes, in the blurry fish-eye lens of the peephole, seemed even more vacant than the first guy's. A flat, dead gaze that sent a fresh shiver down my spine. "Sir, your order. Please, take it." The voice was different, deeper, but the same strangely insistent, almost robotic cadence. I pressed my face closer to the peephole, a cold sweat breaking out on my forehead. This couldn't be happening. My mind, usually adept at rationalization, spun wildly. A prank? A sophisticated, deeply bizarre troll campaign? But who would go to such lengths? And why me? The universe, it seemed, just had a sick sense of humor when it came to Leo Vance. No order," I mumbled, more to myself than to him. "It's not mine. Wrong house, man." This time, I didn't open the door. I just stood there, staring through the peephole, a silent standoff. He continued to hold the box out, an unmoving statue. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only a minute or two, he slowly, almost mechanically, lowered the box. He placed it carefully on the floor directly in front of my door, then turned and walked away, his footsteps eerily silent in the hallway. No angry huff, no frustrated shrug, just a quiet, determined retreat. I waited, frozen, for another 5 minutes, watching the empty spot through the peephole, listening to the echoing silence. My heart rate slowly began to normalize, though a low thrum of anxiety persisted. Satisfied that he was truly gone, I backed away from the door, my legs feeling like jelly. I stumbled back to my desk, collapsing into the chair. My mind was a whirlwind of frantic thoughts. 2 nights, same time, same bizarre scenario. Did some troll find my address? Was this some twisted form of harassment? But no one had asked for payment. There was no demand, no threat, just that unnerving insistence. It defied logic. It defied reality. My fingers flew across the keyboard, typing Gab Pizza Malaysia into the search bar. Nothing. 0 results. No social media, no obscure forum posts, no defunct business listings. It was as if the place didn't exist. My blood ran colder. This wasn't just weird. This was impossible. And then the real gut punch hit me, a wave of realization that washed over me, chilling me to the bone. Lockdown. Complete lockdown. No restaurants could operate past 8 p.m., let alone 3 a.m. And delivery riders weren't allowed to come up to the apartments themselves. They were supposed to leave food at the guardhouse for pickup. So, if these were the rules, and they were, then who the hell had been outside my door? Who, or what, was delivering these pizzas? A primal, bone-deep terror seized me. This wasn't some quirky misunderstanding or a prank. This was something else, something utterly wrong. The memory of the first rider's empty gaze, the second's dead eyes, coalesced into a single, terrifying image. I scrambled backwards, instinctively crawling towards the perceived safety of my bed. My brain was a frenzied hive of panicked thoughts. "It's probably nothing," I whispered, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "I didn't take the pizza in. I didn't eat it. If it happens again, I'll call security. I'll call the cops. It's gonna be okay. This is real life. This is real life." I repeated the mantra over and over, eyes squeezed shut, burrowing deeper into the mattress, clinging to the flimsy hope that I could somehow will this nightmare away. Eventually, against all odds, sleep claimed me, dragging me into a fitful, dream-haunted oblivion. Day 3, the worst kind of day. The one where you anticipate the horror, where the dread builds with every tick of the clock. I woke up at 9 p.m., my body heavy with the lingering exhaustion of a night spent in terror, my mind already racing. My routine felt hollow, an empty charade. I tried to work, to immerse myself in the mindless drone of data entry. But it was impossible. Every nerve ending was frayed, stretched taut like a violin string about to snap. I kept checking my old wristwatch, watching the minutes crawl by, each one a torment. 11 p.m., midnight, 1 a.m. The apartment was still, but it was the stillness of a predator waiting. I stared at my computer screen, desperate for distraction, for anything to pull me away from the inevitable. At 2:25 a.m., it started. Not a knock, not the insistent, almost polite rap from before. This was a sound that began softly, a low, guttural murmur just outside the door, growing steadily in volume. A voice. "Boss, your order. Boss, please, take it. Your order. Boss." My breath hitched. I froze in my seat, my muscles locking up, staring at the door as if my gaze alone could hold back the approaching darkness. The voice was the same cheerful, unnatural cadence I'd heard in my head, but it was clearer now, closer, and the words, repeated over and over, began to shift, subtly, chillingly. "Boss, your order. Your order. Boss." The rhythm became more bizarre, almost a chant. "Your order. Boss, your order. It's here. Boss, for you." It was sing-songy, a twisted lullaby designed to unravel a man's sanity. It continued, an incessant, maddening drone that burrowed into my skull. I didn't move, couldn't move. My eyes were fixed on the door, my ears straining for any other sound, any deviation from the terrifying recital. It went on for what felt like an eternity, maybe 10 minutes, maybe 20. The air in the room grew heavy, cold. My skin prickled with goosebumps despite the lingering humidity. I was aware of every creak of the building, every distant hum of traffic, but the dominant sound, the only sound that mattered, was that cheerful, relentless chant from just beyond the door. Then, as abruptly as it began, it stopped. The silence that descended was absolute, a sudden, jarring void after the oppressive sound. It was worse than the noise. The cessation of the chanting implied a stillness, a waiting. My eyes darted to the clock on my computer screen. 2:55 a.m. 30 minutes since the first sound, 30 minutes of pure, unadulterated psychological torture. My legs were stiff, protesting as I slowly, shakily, pushed myself to my feet. Every instinct screamed at me to stay put, to curl into a ball and disappear. But that stubborn, suicidal curiosity, that damn conscience, dragged me forward. I had to know. I had to see. I had to convince myself it was all a delusion, a figment of my lockdown-addled brain. I crept towards the door, my bare feet silent on the cool linoleum. The maglite was still clutched in my hand, a pathetic weapon against an unseen horror. My hand, slick with sweat, fumbled for the peephole. I pressed my eye against the cold metal. My breath caught in my throat. He was still there, standing perfectly straight, perfectly still, directly in front of my door. The same cheap uniform, the same blank stare. He was holding the pizza box, his arm outstretched, like a grotesque offering. My mind reeled. He hadn't moved, not an inch. For 30 minutes, he'd stood there, chanting, waiting, and then, as if sensing my presence, as if a thread of thought had connected us through the thin barrier, his head snapped up. Not a turn, not a shift. a snap, and his gaze, though it wasn't a gaze at all, was fixed directly on the peephole, on me. He had no eyes. My stomach lurched, threatening to disgorge its meager contents. Where the eyeballs should have been, there were only two gaping, empty sockets, dark, hollow abysses that seemed to drink in the dim light of the hallway. They were perfectly round, like someone had scooped them out with a melon baller. No blood, no residue, just emptiness. The sight was so utterly, viscerally wrong that I almost fell backwards, a choked gasp escaping my throat. I stared, frozen in shock, my mind struggling to process the impossible. This wasn't a hallucination. My neighbor hadn't been hallucinating yesterday. This was real, and it was looking at me. Slowly, impossibly, the thing's lips began to twitch. Then they quirked upwards, curving into a smile. A smile so wide it pulled at the corners of its mouth, stretching the skin unnaturally tight across what must have been bone. It was a rictus, a predatory grin that spoke of hunger and malevolence, completely devoid of warmth or humanity. It was the smile of a puppet, stretched too far by invisible strings. And then, in a voice that was eerily cheerful, bordering on excitement, a voice that was far too human for something so monstrous, it spoke. "Saya tahu you ada kat sana." The words hit me like a physical blow. I recognized them, from some old obscure book I'd once read about Malaysian ghost lore. A phrase often uttered by spirits, by things that lurked in the shadows. It meant, simply, chillingly, "I know you're there." This time, I did fall back. My legs buckled, and I landed on the hard linoleum with a loud thud and a choked yell, the mag light clattering from my grasp. I scrambled away from the door, crab walking backwards on hands and knees, my eyes wide and fixed on the scarred wood. I didn't dare look away, didn't dare blink. I crawled until my back hit the cold wall in the farthest corner of the room, my body a trembling, desperate knot of fear. That's when the banging started. Not soft taps, not insistent knocks. This was an enraged, furious assault. A rhythmic, thunderous pounding that made the flimsy door shudder in its frame, sending tremors through the entire apartment. Each blow resonated through my bones, a physical manifestation of the sheer force of the thing outside. And through the cacophony, still cheerful, still utterly unnerving, came the relentless chant. "Boss, your order! Boss, your order! Boss!" The voice was closer now, distorted by the wood, but clear enough to pierce the terror. "Your order! Boss! Take it! Your order!" I was about to lose control. My bladder felt like it would burst. My stomach churned. My very soul felt like it was being squeezed dry. I pressed myself harder into the corner, burying my face in my knees, eyes squeezed shut. This is it, I thought, over and over, a desperate, pathetic mantra. I'm going to die. This is how it ends, dragged out by a goddamn pizza monster. The thought, bizarre as it was, only deepened the horror. Suddenly, a new sound cut through the nightmare. A loud, angry yell from next door. "Who the hell is making all that noise?" It was my neighbor, a gruff, perpetually annoyed man with a perpetually furrowed brow. I heard thudding footsteps, heavy and decisive, then the unmistakable groan of his door opening. There was a pause, a pregnant, terrifying silence. Then, nothing. No more banging. No more cheerful, terrifying chant. The silence was abrupt, total, as if the thing had simply vanished. I heard my neighbor's door shut with a definitive click, then his heavy footsteps retreating back into his apartment. Slowly, cautiously, I uncurled myself, my limbs stiff and aching. Every muscle screamed in protest. I pushed myself to my feet, my eyes still glued to the door, half expecting the banging to resume, for the eyeless face to reappear in the peephole. But there was nothing, only the lingering echoes of my own ragged breathing. I stumbled towards my bed, my legs feeling like lead. I crawled under the covers, pulling the flimsy sheet up to my chin, burying my face in the pillow. My eyes were squeezed shut, but sleep refused to come. My entire body was on high alert, every nerve jangling. I lay there, trembling, for hours, dreading the return of the thing, waiting for the next cheerful call, the next relentless banging. The darkness pressed in, full of imagined shadows and unheard whispers. Racked with fear and anxiety, the night stretched on, an eternity of pure terror. By the time the first pale rays of sunlight peeked into the room through the window blinds, painting faint stripes across the floor, I was utterly, completely exhausted. My old wristwatch read 6:30 a.m., time to face the music. I dragged myself out of bed, dressed quickly in my usual worn jeans and a plain t-shirt, and made my way down to the security office. The air in the stairwell felt stale, the silence of the lockdown now infused with a sense of oppressive threat. The guard, a young man named Rizal with a perpetually bored expression, looked up from his phone when I entered. I tried to explain what had happened, meticulously recounting the 3 nights of deliveries, the strange voices, the relentless knocking. I carefully omitted the part about the eyeless face and the unnatural smile. I was still clinging to a desperate, fragile hope that it was all a mistake, a trick of the light, a figment of my sleep-deprived imagination. Maybe a weird prank had gone too far. Maybe it was just a human, a deranged human, but human nonetheless. Rizal listened, his expression shifting from boredom to confusion, then to outright doubt. When I finished, he just stared at me blankly. "Sir, no one has been allowed up to the complex, not past the guardhouse, not for weeks. It's lockdown rules. Very strict." He even offered to show me the security footage when he saw the desperate, haunted look in my eyes. The fluorescent lights of the security office hummed, casting a sterile glow on the grainy black and white monitor. Rizal rewound the footage, navigating through the night hours. My heart hammered against my ribs, a desperate drum against the crushing weight of reality. And just as the guard had said, the screen showed nothing. No one approached the building. No one entered the complex. No one walked up the stairs to my floor. And more chillingly, no one was shown outside my door during any of the incidents. Just an empty hallway, still and silent. My blood drained from my face, leaving me feeling cold and hollow. There was nothing I could say, nothing to argue with. The evidence was there, cold and incontrovertible. I thanked the guard, my voice a strained whisper, and turned to leave. Could I be hallucinating? Was the perpetual movement, the constant isolation, the accumulating horror of my life finally breaking my mind? Maybe the lockdown was messing me up more than I could take. I thought to myself as I trudged back upstairs, my body feeling heavier with each step. The idea, though terrifying in its own right, offered a twisted kind of comfort. If I was insane, then it wasn't real. I reached my floor, the hallway stretching out like a tunnel towards my door. I fumbled for my keys, the metal cold and heavy in my trembling hand. As I was about to insert the key into the lock, the door next to mine swung open. My neighbor, Mr. Tan, emerged. His eyes narrowed, already glaring. He was clearly still fuming. "Hey, man," he snarled, his voice low and angry. "What the hell was making all that noise at your door yesterday? Huh? Don't you have any goddamn manners? Don't you know 3 a.m. is when people sleep? If it happens again, I'll report you. Man, I swear to God." Then, without waiting for a reply, he slammed his door shut with a resounding thud. I stood there, frozen, the key still poised over the lock. The blood rushed to my head, then drained away, leaving me lightheaded. He heard it. My neighbor. He actually heard it. My mind, for all its desperate attempts to rationalize, to deny, to escape, finally fractured. It wasn't a hallucination. It wasn't a trick of the light. It wasn't my brain playing games. It was real. Goddamn real. I stumbled into my apartment, slamming the door shut behind me, the sound echoing hollowly in the sudden silence. My go-bag was by the door, a silent promise of escape, but I couldn't move. I just stood there, staring at the scarred wood, at the peephole that had shown me the face of a nightmare. I'm in my room now, huddled in the corner, typing this out on my laptop, the screen a stark white against the creeping darkness of my fear. My old wristwatch, my only constant, shows 1:30 a.m., an hour and a half. Maybe less. It'll come soon. I know it will. It always does. This isn't just a random event. It's another stitch in the tapestry of my cursed existence. Like the whispers in the snow-choked mountain pass. Like the hungry smiles of men who were never quite men. Like the chilling knowledge that there's no escape, not even in death. I've seen too much, felt too much. I'm a magnet for these things. I always have been, ever since that night in Sycamore Grove. Though the details of that past remain stubbornly locked away, the feeling of it, the cold, pervasive terror, is always with me. This is just another layer, another reason to keep running. But where do you run when the thing that hunts you can exist in a security camera's blind spot? When it can be heard by your neighbor, but seen by no one else? When it smiles with empty sockets and knows you're there? I don't know what to do. Save me.